Hello everyone and welcome back to the Horror Hut. Before you drift off, it would be a nice idea if you could leave a comment to let me know where you are listening from. Please don't forget to give the video a like and subscribe to the channel. Right, let's get comfy and relaxed, and let's begin. Story 1, Beyond the Line, Haunting the Outpost. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows that stretched like fingers across the parched desert landscape. I drove slowly along the dusty road, the hum of my truck a solitary comfort in the oppressive silence. My job as a border patrol agent was supposed to be straightforward, a routine of monitoring a stretch of land that seemed endless under the sweltering sun. But as darkness crept in, that routine began to feel like a lurking predator, waiting for the right moment to pounce. The radio crackled to life with the usual static, punctuated by the occasional dispatch. Unit 12, report any suspicious activity. The voice was flat, almost robotic. I kept the volume low, not wanting to disturb the lonely night. Despite my years on the job, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease that gnawed at me, more pronounced on nights like this when the desert came alive with sounds that were often misconstrued. I made a stop at an old checkpoint, the paint peeling off the wooden booth, a relic of better days. I scanned the area, my flashlight beam slicing through the darkness. The wind whispered secrets, rustling through dry brush, but there was no sign of life, human or otherwise. It was just me and the vast emptiness, a vastness that felt both liberating and suffocating. I had grown accustomed to the isolation, even found solace in it. My fellow agents found comfort in camaraderie and banter, but I preferred solitude. I could think here, away from prying eyes. I was preparing to turn around, to head back to the station, when a flicker of movement caught my eye. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light, a mirage dancing on the horizon, but as I focused, I saw the silhouette of a figure moving cautiously among the rocks. My heart raced as I grabbed my radio, fingers trembling slightly. Unit 12, I see something. The radio hissed with static. What do you see, Unit 12? I cleared my throat, trying to regain composure. Someone's out there, approximately 200 yards northeast of my position. They appear to be alone. My eyes narrowed, straining to discern any details. It was difficult in the fading light. Copy that. Approach with caution. Backup is en route. I stepped out of the truck, the heat of the day still lingering in the air, mingling with the coolness of the night. I felt the weight of my badge, the responsibility resting heavy on my shoulders. The desert felt alive, the silence almost deafening as I approached the figure. Underneath the blink of stars, I tried to remember the training manuals, the protocols for such encounters. The figure stumbled, and I could hear a muffled cry, a sound laced with desperation. My instincts kicked in, and I moved faster, brushing against the prickly cacti that lined the path. "Hey!" I shouted, attempting to sound authoritative, but my voice quaked just the same. The figure froze. It was a woman, her clothes torn and dirt-streaked, her eyes wide with fear as she took a step back. "Please," she gasped, her voice raw. "I need help. They're coming." The warning sent a chill through me. I had seen countless faces filled with despair, but this was different. There was a shadow in her eyes that wasn't just fear, it was something deeper, something that spoke of horrors I couldn't fathom. "Who's coming?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Her gaze darted behind me, and I turned instinctively, scanning the desolate landscape. "I can't stay here. You have to help me." Her plea was frantic, and though instinct told me to be wary, I found myself inching closer. "Calm down. I'm here to help you," I said, a reassuring tone creeping into my voice. "What happened?" She shivered, the night air suddenly feeling much colder as if it were a harbinger of what lay ahead. I was with a group. We were trying to cross, but they... Her words fell off, replaced by ragged breaths. Before I could press her for more information, the radio sputtered again, snapping me back to the present. Unit 12, status report. Do you require assistance? I hesitated, caught between my duty and the gnawing sensation that time was slipping away. I'm with a potential subject. I need backup. There was a pause on the other end, a slight crackle that seemed to linger longer than it should have. Unit 12, be advised. Approach with caution. We have reports of an unidentified group in the area. A cold knot formed in my stomach. What kind of group? But the only response was more static, and a sinking dread permeated my thoughts. I looked back at the woman, her eyes filled with a terror that was now mirrored in my own. Whatever she had run from was closer than I had anticipated. The air around us thickened. Shadows stretched ominously, and I could feel that weight again, the sensation of being watched. Stay close to me, I instructed her, my voice barely above a whisper. As we took a step back toward my truck, a distant sound reached my ears, a low growl, like thunder rumbling in the dark. I turned sharply, my heart racing, breath hitching as reality started to blur. The vast, empty desert no longer felt like a sanctuary. It had transformed into a hunting ground. And we were the prey. The sun hung low in the sky, casting a dusky orange hue over the desolate landscape as I trudged along the dusty path leading to the border. Each step sank my boots deeper into the powdery earth, which clung to me like a reminder of the life I had left behind. The last of the sunlight flickered through the gnarled branches of the scrub oak, and the shadowed ground became a tapestry of shifting darkness. I had crossed the line before, but always with certainty, and that certainty was waning. The border patrol checkpoints loomed like specters over my thoughts. In those moments when the weight of my actions became too heavy, I could almost hear the whispers of the others who had come before me, lost souls caught in the labyrinth of despair. The sun finally dipped beneath the horizon, leaving me cloaked in twilight. Each brush of wind against my skin felt like an omen, a reminder that the world around me was alive and watching. I pressed on, my heart racing in time with my footsteps, echoing the fear that clutched at my throat. The border fence was a monstrous thing, an unyielding sentinel rising from the earth, twisted and sharp. I stopped to catch my breath and studied it. The rusted metal glinted in the fading light, a grotesque symbol of separation and fear. I recalled the stories I'd heard, bodies found tangled in the wire, desperate attempts turned tragic. My resolve faltered, but I pushed it aside. I had to keep moving. As I approached the first checkpoint, a sudden chill crept into the air, and I instinctively looked around as if I were being followed. The remnants of the day's heat receded, leaving an unsettling coolness. I had crossed this path countless times, but something felt different. The shadows seemed deeper, more intentional, as if they were hiding something. I moved past the checkpoint, skirting its artificial glow, the flickering fluorescent lights a stark contrast against the encroaching darkness. My pulse quickened at the thought of the agents, their piercing gazes trained on the shadows. Every breath felt like a betrayal, every heartbeat an echo of my past. In the distance, I could see the silhouette of a figure approaching, muffled steps on the gravel road. I crouched behind a cluster of bushes, peering through the branches. The figure turned out to be a border patrol agent, the brim of his cap casting a shadow over his face. My instinct screamed at me to flee, but my curiosity held me captive. I watched as he paused, listening intently, his body hunched as if trying to discern the whispers in the wind. He scanned the area, his flashlight sweeping over the ground and into the brush, casting long shadows that danced like specters in the night. A moment of tension tightened like a noose around my chest. I could feel his gaze penetrating the darkness, searching for any sign of life. The agent took a step closer, and my heart thudded violently in my chest. I forced myself to breathe quietly, to remain still, knowing that any sudden movement could betray me. Suddenly, a distant rustling broke through the silence of the night, causing the agent to whip his head towards the sound. My stomach dropped. It was a sound I recognized all too well, the sound of someone else trying to escape. The agent's flashlight swung toward the noise, illuminating a figure stumbling in the brush. It was a woman, dirty and worn, her clothes torn and her eyes wide with fear. She darted forward, panic evident in her every move. It took a moment for her to notice the agent, and when she did, her expression twisted into one of sheer terror. "Please," she gasped, her voice a choked whisper. "I just want to go home." The agent shouted something I couldn't hear, his tone urgent, commanding. I pressed my back against the rough bark of the tree, feeling the thrum of adrenaline coursing through me. I had a choice to make: risk my safety to help her or remain hidden in the shadows, a coward in the night. Before I could fully process my thoughts, the agent lunged for her, but she was too quick, darting into the trees. He followed, his footsteps thundering against the gravel, and I was left behind, frozen in place. The sound of their struggle melted into the night, each muffled cry a reminder of what I was trying to escape. A moment later, a deafening stillness settled over me. The rustling had stopped, leaving only the echoes of the woman's plea hanging in the air. My heart raced as I imagined what might have happened next, an unease creeping into my consciousness. The agent was still out there, and I could not remain here any longer. I slipped back into the shadows, my feet moving quickly but quietly, my mind swirling with images of what had just occurred. I could feel the weight of my decision pressing down upon me. There was no turning back now. The border was a beast, hungry and relentless, and I had just glimpsed its teeth. With the night closing in around me, I pressed forward, but the questions gnawed at me. Would I ever find peace on the other side? Or was I destined to be just another whisper lost in the wind, the next name on a list of the missing? As I continued down the path, the darkness seemed to reach out, pulling me deeper into its embrace, and with every step, I felt the weight of the Border Patrol's watchful eyes, an unseen presence lingering just beyond my sight. The endless stretch of desert seemed to blur at the edges of my vision as I drove further into the heart of the borderlands. The sun hung low, casting long shadows that danced on the cracked pavement, and I could feel the weight of isolation settling in. I had never planned to be here, but the job offered a paycheck that could last me months. It had felt like a lifeline at the time, a chance to escape my suffocating life back home. Now, it felt like an unraveling thread, tugging on something deep inside me. As I pulled up to the remote station, the sky darkened, clouds swirling together like a gathering storm. The Border Patrol facility was a crumbling building surrounded by barbed wire and flickering floodlights that cast an eerie glow across the gravel lot. I stepped out, the heat of the day still clinging to the air, but a chill ran down my spine as I approached the entrance. Inside, the atmosphere was oppressive. The peeling paint on the walls seemed to whisper secrets, and the fluorescent lights buzzed ominously overhead. I found myself in a cramped break room, where a handful of agents lingered over their coffee, their faces somber and taut. They were all men, their expressions worn and weary, as if they had seen something unspeakable and had grown accustomed to carrying that weight. "New recruit?" one of them asked, his voice gruff. I nodded, feeling the sweat trickle down my back. "Don't get too comfortable. This place has a way of changing people." Their laughter felt forced. I forced a smile, but it felt more like a grimace. The others continued their conversations, sharing stories about encounters across the border, but my attention drifted to a bulletin board plastered with missing persons reports, their faces staring back at me with hollow eyes. Each photograph seemed to hold a warning, a reminder of the dangers that lurked beyond the thin veil of civilization. I was assigned to patrol the more desolate stretches of the border, an area known for its heavy foot traffic. As I walked toward my vehicle, the sun dipped below the horizon, and the desert transformed into a realm of shadows. The headlights flickered to life, illuminating the expanse of emptiness ahead of me. The radio crackled as I drove, the static blending with my thoughts. I recalled the stories the agents had exchanged of smugglers and desperate migrants, of the horrors that lay in wait. I told myself it was just a job, just an assignment, but a gnawing unease settled in my gut. I took a dirt road that forked off the main highway, the tires crunching over gravel as I ventured deeper into the darkness. The vastness of the desert felt more like a living entity, its silence oppressive. I could almost hear it breathing, rustling under the weight of secrets better left uncovered. As I patrolled further, the shadows began to shift and play tricks on my mind. I kept my focus, scanning the horizon, but the feeling of being watched was undeniable. I tried to shake it off, convincing myself it was merely the nerves of a new job, until I spotted movement in the distance, barely discernible shapes slipping through the underbrush. I slowed the vehicle, heart pounding in my chest. There were figures, 3, maybe 4, moving stealthily, their faces obscured by hoods. Instinct kicked in, and I reached for my radio. This is Agent Torres. I have eyes on suspected migrants heading north. Requesting backup. Silence greeted my call. I frowned, glancing back at the radio, but the static continued, the air heavy with anticipation. I turned my attention back to the figures, who had stopped moving. They huddled together like shadows, whispering among themselves. I couldn't make out their words, but I could sense their urgency, their desperation palpable even from a distance. I turned off the engine, the sudden stillness of the desert swallowing the sound. Clutching my flashlight, I stepped out of the vehicle, each crunch of gravel sounding like a thunderclap in the silence. I crept toward the figures, drawn in by the mix of fear and curiosity. As I approached, I caught snippets of their conversation, words of home, of hope, of a promise that felt as distant as the stars above. My heart ached for them, but I knew the law. They were illegal, and my duty was to enforce the rules of the land. But before I could make a decision, the ground beneath me shifted. A rumble echoed through the earth, a deep, guttural sound that sent a tremor through my bones. The figures froze, their gazes snapping to the ground as if they sensed something I did not. Panic flickered in their eyes, and in that moment, they scattered, darting into the darkness like frightened rabbits. I shouted, "Stop!" My voice echoed into the night, swallowed by the vast emptiness. I hesitated, torn between my duty and the instinct to chase after them. Instead, I turned back to the vehicle, but the rumble intensified, vibrating through my chest. It was no longer a distant sound, it was close, far too close. Then I heard it, a wailing, almost human, rising from somewhere within the earth. My breath caught in my throat, and the hairs on my arms stood on end. The ground heaved, and I stumbled backward, fear coiling tight in my stomach. The wailing grew louder, and I caught a glimpse of something rising from the ground, a figure draped in shadows, its form shifting and writhing. I could barely make out the features, but the eyes were unmistakable, glinting with a hunger that sent a chill through my veins. I turned to run, heart racing, but the ground opened up beneath me, and I fell into darkness, swallowed whole by the terror that lurked in the borderlands. The night pressed in around me, heavy with a darkness that felt almost alive. The distant sound of cicadas droned like a warning, and their chorus mingled with the uneasy rustle of the wind. I peered through the dirty window of the old cabin, half expecting the shadows just beyond the trees to shift and reveal something monstrous. I had always known it was only a matter of time before the border patrol found me. Earlier that day, I had fled from the chaos of the city, leaving behind my shattered life. I thought I could outrun my past, but as dusk fell, I realized that the invisible chains of guilt around my heart were tighter than I had imagined. I was hiding in a forgotten section of the forest where the boundary blurred between one world and another, teetering on the precipice of fear. I had settled on the cabin for one reason: isolation. The crumbling structure had been abandoned for years, coated in layers of dust, and I had hoped it would serve as a temporary refuge. It came with its own memories, I could feel the lingering history in the walls, whispers of those who had come before. But tonight, I couldn't shake the sensation that someone or something was watching from the shadows. As I wrapped my arms around myself, the old wooden floor creaked beneath my weight. I shivered and glanced at the door, half expecting to see a silhouette illuminated by the moonlight. Instead, I saw nothing but the impenetrable darkness beyond. I thought of turning on the lantern, but the thought of exposing myself was terrifying. My heart raced as I imagined the patrol, their flashlights cutting through the obscurity, searching for anything out of place. It wasn't just the border patrol I feared. It was the stories I had heard, chilling tales from travelers who had dared to cross the unseen line that divided our worlds. They spoke of things that roamed the land, hunters in the night, predators that thrived on fear and desperation. I had dismissed them as urban legends, but now, trapped in the cabin surrounded by the looming forest, those stories wove themselves into my thoughts. I pushed away from the window and paced the room, trying to shake the mounting dread. Outside, a guttural growl reverberated through the air, low and menacing. It was a sound unlike any I had heard before, something primal that made my blood run cold. I froze, straining to recall the source of that noise. It was like the forest itself had come alive, a beast lurking just beyond my sight. I pressed my back against the wall, the rough texture scraping against my skin. I wanted to scream out, to demand that whatever hunted me come forward and face me, but I couldn't find my voice. I took a deep breath, tasting the stale air, trying to gather my thoughts. I had to stay calm. I had always been good at that, keeping my head when everything else fell apart. But then the growling intensified, punctuated by the rustling of leaves and snapping of twigs. My heart thudded in my chest, each beat echoing the panic that gripped me. I grabbed the old rusted knife I had found in the kitchen drawer, its metal cool and reassuring in my palm. It wouldn't do much against what I imagined was out there, but it was better than nothing. Suddenly, there was a loud thump against the cabin door. My breath hitched as I instinctively crouched low, my heart racing with terror. The door rattled in its frame, and I could hear voices, low, wary. They were coming closer, their footsteps crunching through the underbrush, dragging the weight of authority behind them. "Do you hear that?" one of the voices asked, faint but distinct. "Might be someone hiding in there." I pressed my back tightly against the wall, my mind racing. Border Patrol. They had finally come. Panic surged through me, and I struggled to suppress the urge to flee. There was nowhere to go. I was trapped. "Let's check it out," another voice said, and I could hear the crunch of boots on the wooden porch. "We don't leave any stone unturned." I clutched the knife with a white-knuckled grip. They would find me, and I had no way of explaining my presence here. I had broken the law, yes, but my intention had never been malicious. They wouldn't care about my past or my motives. To them, I was just another fugitive hiding in the woods. The door creaked open slowly, the rusted hinges protesting. They filled the space with a beam of light, and shadows spilled into the cabin. I held my breath, praying for invisibility. The first figure stepped inside, a tall man with a stern face, illuminated by the flashlight that swept across the room. He looked around, eyes narrowed, searching every corner. "Clear," he said, and another figure, a woman, stepped in behind him. "Check the back," she ordered, and my heart sank. They were trained to find people like me. I envisioned them shining their light directly at me, finding me curled in the corner like a cornered animal. The man stepped further inside, the beam of his flashlight dancing across the walls. I knew they could sense my fear, the way it saturated the air. I couldn't afford to breathe. I wanted to crawl under the floorboards and disappear into the earth itself. Then the woman let out a soft, almost sardonic laugh. "Nothing but junk in here. We'll check the perimeter and see if we can't find more tracks." I couldn't see her, but I heard her footsteps retreating. The man continued to scan the room, and my heart raced as he drew closer. I squeezed my eyes shut, willing myself to be invisible, to melt into the shadows. The world outside was dark, and I hoped it would swallow me whole. Just as I thought I had escaped their gaze, he stopped, and I felt the weight of his presence wash over me. A tense silence enveloped us, and I held my breath, praying he would turn around and leave. The door creaked as the weight of the world seemed to close in on me. "Hello," he called out, his voice echoing in the small space. "Anyone there?" I remained frozen, the knife poised at my side. I couldn't answer. I couldn't move. All I could do was wait and pray that darkness would hold its secrets just a little longer. The air was thick with tension as I drove down the cracked highway, the headlights of my old sedan slicing through the darkness like a knife. My heart pounded in my chest, the rhythmic thud matching the flickering of the dashboard lights. I had hoped to escape the lingering dread, but it followed me like a shadow, whispering that I was being watched. It had been 3 days since I'd crossed the border. 3 days since I'd left behind the stifling heat of the desert sun, but I could still feel the oppressive weight of it bearing down on my back. The memories were etched in my mind, the heat waves distorting the horizon, the barren landscape stretching endlessly, and the unrelenting patrols that seemed to roam like wolves in search of any sign of life. I had witnessed their harsh enforcement of restrictions, their brutal efficiency when they caught someone crossing unlawfully. Yet, the most haunting part of it all was the fear that had settled over those who remained, a fear that now clung to me like a second skin. I had intended to keep a low profile, to disappear into the anonymity of small-town living. But that first night back, when I had slumped on the couch of my apartment, I felt the weight of every choice I had made. The flickering bulb overhead buzzed, and the stench of stale air prickled my senses. I knew the border patrol was still out there, lurking in the shadows, and I couldn't shake the images of those faces I had seen, hollow-eyed, desperate, and full of despair. My phone buzzed beside me, pulling me from my thoughts. It was a text from Miguel, one of the few friends I had left on that side of the desert. "They're looking for you," it read. My blood ran cold. "Be careful. They're asking questions." The paranoia that had nagged me since I returned now rushed back in full force. My past was a ghost that refused to be silenced. I had only wanted to get away from everything, my family, my mistakes, the decisions that had led me to hide in the shadows. But fear had a way of creeping back, embedding itself like a splinter. Unable to sit still, I got up and moved toward the window, peering into the darkness beyond. The streetlights cast long, distorted shadows on the pavement. I scanned the street, half expecting to see a pair of headlights approaching, but all I found was the eerie stillness of the night. The next morning, I decided to take a walk. I told myself the fresh air would do me good, that I needed the exercise, but as I stepped outside, I felt a shiver run down my spine. The sun was bright, the sky a piercing blue, but an ominous feeling hung over me like a storm cloud. I walked without purpose, letting my feet guide me through the town. As I passed the small cafe where I used to grab coffee, I noticed a few familiar faces. People who had once welcomed me with open arms now looked at me with suspicion. They whispered and pointed, their glances heavy with judgment. Before long, I found myself wandering toward the outskirts, where the town met the vast stretches of fields that seemed to stretch toward infinity. I wanted to escape, to forget. But the memories surged back as I walked, the sound of boots crunching on gravel, the barking of dogs in the distance, the distant rumble of patrol trucks searching for anyone who dared defy the desolate landscape. My thoughts were interrupted by a low hum in the air, the drone of a helicopter slicing through the serenity. I stopped and squinted upward. The whirring blades sent a chill through me, and I instinctively ducked behind a nearby tree, my heart hammering in my chest. The shadows of the helicopter danced over the ground, and I watched as it turned, sweeping the area with an unsettling precision. Then I heard it, a voice, amplified and crackling through a loudspeaker. This is the Border Patrol. If you are in the area, you are advised to return to your homes. We are conducting a search. The words sent a bolt of fear through my veins. I knew that if they found me, if they connected my face with the history I had tried to bury, I would be in grave trouble. Panic surged as I turned to bolt back toward town, my feet stumbling over the uneven terrain. But as I made my way through the underbrush, I heard laughter, a cruel, mocking sound that froze me in my tracks. It echoed through the trees, chilling to the bone. I turned slowly, scanning the area, but there was nothing. Just the rustle of leaves and the hum of the helicopter above. The laughter came again, louder this time, a sound that felt almost human but twisted, distorted. My heart raced as I took a step back, feeling as if I had crossed into another realm where dark figures lurked behind every tree. I was losing my grip on reality, my paranoia spiraling into something much darker. Then, in the distance, I spotted them, figures in uniform, their faces obscured by the sun's glare, moving methodically through the brush, searching. I ducked lower, my breath shallow, my hands trembling. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but the laughter echoed in my mind. I had to get back to town. I turned on my heel, sprinting down the path I had come, adrenaline pumping through me. But as I ran, I could feel them closing in. My thoughts raced, a cacophony of fear and memories colliding in my mind. The world twisted, and the line between reality and nightmare blurred. As I neared the edge of town, I risked a glance back. The figures were closer now, moving with an eerie confidence that made my skin crawl. The laughter resumed, echoing louder than before, and I felt a cold dread enveloping me. I was not just running from the past, I was being hunted. Story 2, Echoes of the Forsaken Grove. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and rotting leaves as I stumbled through the underbrush, the sun dipping low in the cloud-heavy sky. Every rustle of branches and snap of twigs echoed in my ears, wrapping me in an oppressive silence that clung like a shroud. The woods had always been my sanctuary, a place where I found solace from the world. But today, the trees loomed over me like overseers of a grim fate, their skeletal branches stretching out like fingers ready to snatch me away. I couldn't remember how long I had been walking. Time blurred into a haze of anxiety and confusion. The thrill of exploring these woods had turned into a desperate need to escape. The map I had clutched so tightly in my hand now lay crumpled in my pocket, a useless reminder of my failed navigation. I had ventured too far, lost track of the familiar trail, and now I was a wanderer in a maze of shadows. A chill coursed through me as I paused to catch my breath, leaning against a gnarled oak. It was then I heard it, a faint whisper carried by the wind, not quite intelligible but undeniably present. My heart raced as I strained to listen, hoping it was a figment of my beleaguered imagination. Yet, the sound persisted, a soft cadence that seemed to beckon me deeper into the woods. Against my better judgment, I followed the sound, my feet moving with a will of their own. Perhaps it was the hope of finding someone else, another lost soul wandering through the desolation, or maybe it was simple curiosity. The whisper wrapped around me like a siren's call, drawing me further from the path I had come. The brush thickened as I ventured deeper, and soon I lost sight of the sky, the trees forming a canopy that strangled out what little light remained. It felt as though I had entered another world, one where time had no meaning and reality began to fray at the edges. Shadows danced around me, teasing and taunting, and I found myself glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see someone or something lurking just out of sight. Then, without warning, the whisper intensified, rising to a fervent pitch that sent a shiver down my spine. My breath quickened as I pressed forward, the sound echoing through the trees like a forgotten chant. I pushed aside a curtain of branches and stumbled into a clearing, gasping at the sight before me. In the center stood an old, decrepit cabin, its weathered boards sagging under the weight of years. It looked as if it had been abandoned for decades, overtaken by the encroaching woods. Windows, once bright and welcoming, gaped like empty eye sockets, and the door hung crookedly on its hinges, swaying gently as if inviting me in. I froze, an unease settling in my stomach. The whispers had stopped, replaced by an unsettling stillness that blanketed the clearing. I should have turned back, but the cabin held a fascination that I couldn't resist. My curiosity overpowered my fear, and I took a hesitant step forward. The crunch of twigs underfoot echoed like thunder in the quiet, sending a jolt of panic through me. I glanced around, half expecting someone to emerge from the shadows, but the woods remained still, watching. As I approached the cabin, the door creaked open slightly, revealing darkness within. I hesitated, the weight of dread pressing down on me, but an inexplicable pull urged me inside. I gripped the door frame and stepped over the threshold, the cool air swirling around me, carrying the scent of damp wood and something else, something metallic. Inside, the cabin was a time capsule of decay. Dust motes danced in the feeble light filtering through the broken windows, and the remnants of furnishings lay scattered like discarded thoughts. A rusted knife glinted from a table, and shattered glass crunched beneath my feet as I stepped further in, each sound amplifying the tension that clung to the air. On the wall, a faded photograph caught my eye, a family frozen in time, their faces smiling with a joy that felt foreign in this desolate space. I reached out to touch the frame, but before my fingers made contact, I heard it again, the whisper, now clearer, like a voice struggling to rise above the silence. It was a name, Lila. My heart pounded in my chest as I stumbled back, suddenly feeling very much like an intruder. I turned to leave, but the door slammed shut behind me, the sound reverberating through the hollow walls. Panic surged, and I rattled the handle, but it refused to budge. The darkness pressed in on me, and the whispers grew louder, swirling around me like a tempest, each syllable soaking into my skin, branding me with dread. Lila, they called again, pulling at the edges of my sanity. I backed away from the door, the weight of the cabin crushing down. Shadows shifted at the corners of my vision, and I felt an unseen presence surrounding me, their breath icy against my neck. I wanted to scream, to cry out for help, but the words caught in my throat, drowned out by the roar of my heartbeat. Trapped in that forsaken space, I realized the woods had led me to something far darker than I could have ever imagined. The whispers morphed into laughter, a haunting sound echoing through the cabin, echoing my own growing terror. I was not alone here. I never had been. The night settled over the woods like a thick shroud, swallowing the last vestiges of daylight. The remains of the sun, barely a memory, bled into the horizon, leaving me surrounded by an oppressive darkness that thickened the air. The only sounds were the rustling leaves and the occasional snap of twigs beneath unseen feet. Each noise felt amplified, echoing in my ears like a warning bell. I crouched low against the trunk of an old oak, my heart hammering in my chest. The woods felt alive, breathing around me, wrapping me in an embrace that was both familiar and foreign. I had wandered into these woods many times as a child, playing hide and seek among the trees, but they felt different now. There was a weight to the silence, a heaviness that pressed down on my shoulders. The air turned colder, and I pulled my arms tighter around myself. My breath came out in visible puffs, floating away into the night before dissolving into nothingness. I hadn't meant to get lost. I had followed the trail, a familiar path that twisted and turned, leading to the clearing where I often went to think. But somehow, I had strayed too far. The trees had closed in around me, their gnarled branches like clawed hands reaching for my skin. I thought of Peter, my brother, and how we used to run through the woods together, our laughter echoing off the trunks like a song. But that was years ago, before the incident. I pushed the thought away, focusing instead on finding my way back. The little flashlight I had was no good. The beam flickered weakly, sputtering like a dying firefly. Panic clawed at my throat as I fumbled for my phone, but the screen remained dark, unresponsive. The path had vanished, leaving me disoriented, separated from the world I knew. I stood slowly, scanning the darkness. I could feel it then, creeping along my spine, a sensation that I wasn't alone. I shook my head to dispel the fear that whispered in my ear, a gentle voice laced with doubt. Surely it was just my mind playing tricks as shadows danced between the trees. With a deep breath, I took a step forward, my foot crunching on a carpet of dry leaves. Instantly, I froze, straining to listen. There it was again, a soft sound, like the rustling of fabric. I pivoted, squinting into the dark, desperate to discern some shape or figure lurking in the shadows. My heart raced as I felt the air thicken, pressing in on me as if the very woods were watching. "Hello?" I called out, my voice trembling. The silence returned, thick and suffocating, swallowing my words whole. I took another step, this time more cautious. The flash in my mind of Peter's smiling face faded, replaced by the memories of the nights when he had slipped away from me, leaving only the laughter of the woods behind. Another rustle drifted through the trees, closer this time. My pulse quickened. I turned on my flashlight, the beam weak and flickering, but enough to illuminate the space immediately around me. I scanned every inch, my eyes darting from tree to tree, searching for any hint of movement. Nothing. Just the trees standing like sentinels, indifferent to my plight. I didn't want to believe I was losing my grip on reality, but the darkness felt suffocating, and the weight of loneliness began to press on my chest. I started to walk again, this time more deliberately, a single thought echoing in my mind: find a way out. Each step felt heavier than the last as dread coiled in my stomach. I had never been afraid of the woods, but now, with the shadows stretching and the chill biting into my skin, I couldn't shake the sensation of being hunted. Then I heard it, a soft, melodic whisper that floated through the trees, weaving its way into my thoughts. I stopped, straining to listen. The voice was almost sweet, laced with an alluring quality that tugged at my heart. It was calling to me, inviting me deeper into the woods, promising solace and safety. But there was something unsettling about it, a hunger beneath the surface. "Peter?" I called again, more desperate now. The whisper faded for a moment, leaving only the unsettling echoes of my own voice. I felt the hairs on the back of my neck rise. I shivered, not just from the cold but from the unsettling feeling that something was watching me. A branch snapped nearby, and I spun around just in time to catch a glimpse of movement, something tall and dark slipping between the trees. Adrenaline surged through my veins, and without thinking, I turned and ran. I pushed through the underbrush, branches clawing at my arms as I fled, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I ran until my legs burned and my lungs screamed for air. The darkness surrounded me completely, blinding me to any sense of direction. Each step felt like I was sinking deeper into an abyss, the sounds of the woods amplifying moaning winds, crackling leaves, my own heartbeat thundering in my ears. I stumbled into a small clearing, the trees parting slightly as if giving me a moment of reprieve. I sank to the ground, gasping. The whisper had returned, more insistent now, a haunting melody that curled around me, luring me to listen. I pressed my palms against my ears, desperate to drown it out. But it seeped through the cracks, filling my mind with shadowy images and echoes of laughter. It was no longer just a voice, it felt like a presence, weaving its way into my thoughts, tugging at my memories. I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to summon the strength to fight it off, but the darkness pressed in, and I could feel it closing around me like a trap. In that moment, I realized the woods had become something other than home. They were a labyrinth, a maze designed to keep me within their grasp, and I was the prey, lost and alone. The shadows lengthened as I trudged deeper into the woods. Each step felt heavier than the last, as if the forest itself was reaching out to clutch at my legs, anchoring me to a place I desperately wanted to escape. The trees stood like sentinels, their gnarled branches twisting against the dimming sky, casting grotesque shapes on the ground. A knot of unease twisted in my gut, and every rustle of leaves sounded like whispers beckoning me further into the darkness. It had been hours since I'd awoken and realized I was alone. The camp had been filled with laughter and stories just the night before. We had gathered around the fire, the warmth of the flames warding off the chill that hinted at the coming autumn. But when I had sat up, the embers still glowing in the pit, I found my friends gone, packed up and vanished into the night as if they had never existed at all. I called out for them, but the only response was the echo of my own voice, swallowed by the towering trees. I tried to convince myself they were playing a prank, that they were hiding nearby, waiting to leap out and scare me. But the weight of silence pressed down, thick and suffocating. I moved through the underbrush, heart racing, calling their names until my throat burned. No reply. Only the rustling of the wind and the distant call of a bird, a sound that felt more like a farewell than a greeting. The sun dipped lower on the horizon, painting the sky in shades of bruised violet and deepening gray. I felt the temperature drop, and I pulled my jacket tighter around my shoulders. Visions of my friends' faces flickered in my mind, laughter, camaraderie, but they began to fade like the light around me. I wondered if I was losing my mind, wandering through the woods like a character from one of those ghost stories we used to tell while huddled around the fire. The thought made my stomach churn. Navigating through the thickening brush became a struggle. I stumbled over roots and encroaching rocks, each misstep sending a jolt of fear coursing through me. I wished for a semblance of direction, but every twist and turn felt arbitrary. The trees closed in around me, their trunks looming like watchful phantoms. Frustration clouded me, but I pressed on, driven by a primal instinct to find safety. As dusk settled like a heavy cloak, I caught a glimpse of something out of the corner of my eye. I froze, heart pounding. A figure, half hidden behind the trunk of a large oak, slipped away when I turned to focus. It felt like a trick of the light, or perhaps my mind playing games with me in the creeping shadows. I blinked, willing the shape to reappear, but it had vanished. Just the trees remained, watching, waiting. "Hello?" I called out, my voice wavering. Silence wrapped around me, thick and foreboding. I cursed myself for sounding so weak, for hoping against hope that someone might respond. The last remnant of daylight dwindled, leaving me in a vast sea of darkness. A knot of panic tightened in my chest, and I turned to retrace my steps, hoping to find the path back to camp. But the woods, once familiar, now felt like a labyrinth designed to ensnare me. An unsettling thought burrowed into my mind. What if they hadn't left me behind? What if they had never existed? I shook my head, trying to dispel the notion. I couldn't be the only one here. There had to be others. I just needed to find them. The air thickened, suddenly damp and heavy, as if I had entered a different realm. Shadows coalesced into shapes, and I could have sworn I heard whispers carried on the wind. I stopped to listen, straining to catch the words, but all I heard was an eerie rustling, like dry leaves skittering across the ground. My instinct screamed at me to move, to keep going, but every instinct cried out against the unnatural stillness that surrounded me. I pressed on again, and with each step, an uneasy sensation danced along my spine. The sounds of the forest morphed, growing deeper, more sinister. The wind took on a mournful howl, the rustle of branches a warning. I stumbled into a clearing, and the moon broke free of the cloud cover, spilling silver light onto the ground. In the center of the clearing stood an enormous, ancient tree, its trunk wide and twisted, roots sprawling like skeletal hands clawing at the earth. A chill crept over me. I felt inexplicably drawn to it, but an unshakable dread kept my feet rooted to the ground. Something about the tree felt wrong, as if it were watching, waiting for me to approach. Suddenly, a sound fractured the stillness. A soft, low growl emanated from the shadows beyond the clearing. My breath hitched in my throat, and instinct kicked in. I turned, adrenaline flooding my veins as I sprinted back into the woods. I tore through the underbrush, branches snapping beneath my weight, the night closing in around me. My heart pounded louder than the sound of my feet hitting the ground, fear propelling me forward. I could hear the growl again, closer now, low and menacing. I dared not look back as I ran, but I could feel it behind me, a presence stalking through the darkness like the predator it was. I stumbled, my foot catching on a root, and I fell to the ground, gasping for breath. Panic surged within me, and I scrambled to my feet, heart racing, knowing I had to keep moving. I didn't dare stop, not for a second. A sense of desperation gripped me as I plunged deeper into the woods, a place that once felt like a refuge now transformed into a nightmarish maze. I had no idea where I was going, but I knew that whatever had been lurking in the shadows wouldn't give up easily. The trees closed in around me as I ran, their branches stabbing into my arms and face, but I barely felt the pain. All that mattered was the instinct to survive, to escape the unseen terror that pulled at my heels. As the night deepened, I could only hope that I would find a way out before the darkness claimed me completely. The cold had seeped into my bones by the time the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky a bruised purple. I had spent the day wandering through the woods, my feet aching as I stumbled over roots and rocks, desperately seeking any sign of the path I thought I had followed. It had been hours since I lost sight of my friends, and panic had settled in the pit of my stomach like a heavy stone. The forest, once vibrant and alive with the sounds of chirping birds and rustling leaves, had morphed into a sinister labyrinth. Shadows danced among the trees, twisting and curling in ways that made it hard to tell where the light ended and darkness began. Each snap of a twig underfoot made my heart leap, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was not alone. As twilight deepened, the familiar landmarks I'd relied on during the day blurred into obscurity. I clutched my phone tightly, but the screen remained dark, the battery long dead. My friends had decided to split up to find a way back to the campsite, a decision that now seemed reckless. "Stay close," Emma had said, her voice crackling with laughter as she had danced off down the trail, her ponytail swinging like a pendulum. What could possibly go wrong? I could still hear that laughter echoing in my mind, a cruel reminder of the innocence with which we had entered the woods. The chill in the air grew sharper, and I shivered, recalling how small and safe the campfire had felt, surrounded by the glowing warmth of friendship. Now, I was utterly alone, the darkness swallowing me whole. I continued to walk, my breath coming in sharp bursts, a tightness in my chest that felt like the forest itself was constricting around me. Every so often, I would call out their names, a hollow sound that was swallowed by the stillness. Emma. Jake. Lucas. The silence that followed felt like a weight pressing down on me. After what felt like an eternity, I stumbled upon a clearing. The moonlight broke through the canopy, illuminating a circle of grass where the trees seemed to bow in reverence. I paused, a flicker of hope igniting within me. Maybe I had found a route back to the campsite. I turned slowly, scanning the edges of the clearing for any sign of my friends. But as I stood there, a sense of unease washed over me, stronger than before. The air grew heavy, stifling, as if the woods had drawn a breath and were holding it, waiting. My heart raced, and I took a step back, feeling exposed under the watchful eyes of the trees. That was when I heard it, a soft whisper, barely audible, carried on the night breeze. I strained to listen, but the words were elusive. It almost sounded like my name, floating just out of reach. "Is anyone there?" I called out, the bravado in my voice faltering as the whisper faded into silence. I was left with nothing but the rustle of leaves and the pounding of my own heartbeat. Then, the shadows around the clearing shifted. I froze, staring into the darkness that curled around the trees like smoke. My mind raced with possibilities. It was nothing, just my imagination. I had watched too many horror movies, believed too fervently in the tales of the woods. But then, in the dim light, I saw it, a figure. It moved just outside the edge of the clearing, barely distinguishable from the shadows that surrounded it. I squinted, heart thumping in my chest, and took a hesitant step forward. Who's there? I called out again, my voice stronger this time, though it trembled with fear. The figure paused, almost as if it was considering whether to step into the light. My breath caught in my throat. The movement had not been human, the way it glided through the darkness like a wisp of smoke. I took another step, and the figure retreated further into the trees, dissolving into the night. I should have turned back. I should have fled in the opposite direction. But curiosity and fear battled within me, and against my better judgment, I followed. Each step felt like a descent into madness. I called out for my friends again, but the only response was the echo of my own voice, bouncing back from the trees. As I moved deeper into the woods, the air thickened, suffocating me. I could hear my own pulse thundering in my ears, a frantic drumbeat urging me to turn back. But I pressed on, drawn by the need to know what lay ahead. The whisper returned, clearer this time, and I felt it wrap around me like a cold embrace. Come. I hesitated, then called out, "Is it you? Emma?" My voice trembled, wavering between hope and despair. The darkness seemed to swallow my words, and for a moment, silence reigned. Then, a low chuckle broke through, sending chills down my spine. It wasn't Emma's voice, nor any of my friends. It was something other, something that thrived in the shadows. Panic surged within me, and I turned to run. Branches snagged at my clothes, tearing at my skin as I stumbled back toward the clearing, but the sounds of the forest grew louder, more chaotic, as if the very woods were alive and angry at my intrusion. Laughter echoed behind me, mingling with the rustle of leaves and the snapping of twigs underfoot. I burst into the clearing, gasping for breath, but it was no longer the safe haven I had hoped for. The moon hung low, casting eerie shadows that twisted in on themselves, and the air felt electric, charged with an unholy energy. The figure stood at the other end of the clearing, the darkness swirling around it like a cloak. I stood frozen, my instincts screaming at me to flee, but my legs felt rooted to the ground. The figure stepped forward, revealing a face shrouded in shadows. I could not make out its features, but I felt its eyes, cold and hungry, locking onto mine. "Stay with us," it whispered, the voice resonating deep within my bones. "Stay forever." The world tilted, and I felt myself sway, caught in its gaze as the shadows closed in on me. The woods had claimed me, and I understood with a terrible clarity that there was no escape. The shadows in the woods deepened as dusk settled over the trees, twisting my surroundings into a labyrinth of dark, gnarled branches and underbrush that seemed to whisper secrets. I had spent the entire day searching for a way out of this forsaken place, but here I was, still lost, still trapped. Each step I took felt heavier, as if the very earth conspired against me, pulling me down into some unseen depths. I stumbled through the thicket, the thorns clawing at my clothes like desperate hands, determined to hold me back. The sun dipped lower on the horizon, casting elongated shadows that danced with every gust of wind. The air grew thick, suffocating my thoughts as I replayed my last moments of clarity when I hadn't realized how far I had ventured from my friends and civilization. That camping trip, meant to be a break from the mundane, had quickly spiraled into a nightmare. My voice trembled as I called out for them, but all that greeted me was the rustling of leaves. They didn't answer. I tried to banish the dread knotting in my stomach, reminding myself that it was possible they were just as lost and looking for me. For my own sanity, I clung to that hope. I pressed on, following the incline of the land, thinking that perhaps if I reached a higher point, I would spot the flickering light of the campfire or, at least, the silhouettes of my friends. The woods remained silent except for the occasional rustle of small creatures scuttling away from the sound of my footsteps. It was a reminder that I was intruding upon their domain. As the twilight deepened, I stumbled upon a clearing. The soft glow of the moon bathed the area in an otherworldly light. My heart quickened, a mix of fear and hope coursing through me. This was the first hint of salvation I had seen. I took a deep breath and scanned the surroundings. There were no signs of my friends, but the clearing felt oddly inviting, too still, too perfect amid the chaos of the woods. I noticed something in the center, a weathered, moss-covered stump. Curiosity drew me closer. On the stump lay a small, rusty tin box, half buried in the earth. My fingers tingled with anticipation as I knelt down to inspect it, brushing away the dirt and leaves. The lid creaked open, revealing a collection of faded photographs and yellowed notes. They were remnants of lives long past, perhaps similar to mine, once vibrant and now reduced to this forgotten relic. Each photograph depicted moments of laughter and joy, an old couple smiling in front of a cabin, a group of young adults around a campfire. I flipped through the notes, each one more unsettling than the last. They spoke of fear, of losing their way, and of things that scuttled in the dark. One note in particular caught my eye. It was scrawled in desperate, jagged handwriting, "Never stay after dark. They come out at night." A chill ran down my spine as I read those words. Who were they? I had only wanted to escape the mundanity of my life, to breathe in the fresh air and share laughter with friends, but here I was, face to face with the haunting remnants of those who had come before me. I stood, clutching the notes in trembling hands, and glanced around the clearing. The feeling of being watched crept over me. It was palpable, as if the trees themselves leaned in, eager to overhear my thoughts. My instinct screamed to leave, to run, but panic rooted me to the spot. Suddenly, a sound broke the stillness. A twig snapped close. My heart raced as I turned, scanning the edges of the clearing, adrenaline flooding my veins. "Hello?" I called out, my voice barely more than a whisper. Silence. But then, just at the periphery of my vision, I thought I saw movement, just a flicker of motion, an outline slipping behind a tree. I sprinted in the opposite direction, my breath coming in harsh gasps. I stumbled, almost falling, as I pushed through brambles and weeds, the treetops closing in around me like a cage. The thick undergrowth snagged my legs, pulling me back, eager to devour me whole. I fell to the ground, the damp earth cold against my skin. I turned on my back, gasping for air, waiting for the darkness to swallow me. I could hear it now, the soft whispers of the forest growing louder, like the taunts of unseen creatures. I could no longer tell if the sounds were real or figments of my frayed mind, spiraling into madness. And then, in the distance, I heard something else. A voice. Low and indistinct, luring me like a siren's call. I strained to listen, my heart pounding. "Help me." The voice was weak, desperate. It could easily have been my imagination, but it felt too real, too close. I couldn't stay here. I had to find it. With every ounce of strength left, I pulled myself to my feet and followed the sound, weaving through the trees. The moon hung high, illuminating my path sporadically, the shadows pulling at me like spectral hands. I could feel breath on my neck, a presence at my back, urging me onward. "Help me." The voice echoed again, clearer now. It was closer, but it was no longer a plea. It had morphed into something sinister, a mocking echo of my own fear. I broke into a run, branches tearing at my clothes, my heart thrumming erratically. Each step felt more desperate, more frantic. As I sprinted deeper into the woods, I knew I had to find the source of that voice. The night was growing thicker, the darkness more oppressive, but I could not turn back now. I had to face this head-on, even if it meant confronting whatever horror lurked within the heart of the forest. Story 3, The Last Hunt of the Cursed Stalker. The cold air hung thick in the woods, a stark reminder that summer was just a fading memory. I had always loved the forest, its towering pines standing like ancient sentinels, guardians of some unseen truth. Those trees whispered secrets, their rustling leaves inviting me deeper into the shadows. But on that day, the forest felt different, a weight settling in my chest as I ventured beyond the familiar trails. I had grown up hunting with my father. Each autumn, we would disappear into the embrace of nature, a bond forged in the silence of the woods. He taught me to respect every creature, to understand that the thrill of the hunt came with a responsibility. But now, years later, as I stood alone in the dim light with my rifle slung across my shoulder, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows that twisted and coiled, making the once inviting path seem sinister. I'd come out here for solace after my father's passing, hoping the familiarity would bring me peace. Yet, all I felt was an unsettling sense of dread. The forest that had once been a canvas for countless memories now felt like a labyrinth with no exit. After hours of searching for signs of deer, I stumbled upon an area that looked unlike anything I'd seen before. An expansive clearing lay ahead, encircled by gnarled trees that seemed to lean in, as if eager to eavesdrop on whatever transpired within. I stepped cautiously into the clearing, my heart racing. The ground was damp, littered with leaves that had gone brittle with age. A strange aroma permeated the air, earthy yet oddly metallic, sending shivers down my spine. In the center stood remnants of a fire pit, its stones blackened and cracked. But it wasn't the pit that caught my attention, it was the surrounding area. Scattered across the ground were remnants of animal remains, bones picked clean and oddly arranged, as if some ritual had taken place. My pulse quickened. It was not the first time I had come across nature's leftovers, but the arrangement was disturbingly deliberate. I crouched down for a closer look, instinctively glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see a figure emerge from the trees. But nothing stirred. I tried to shake off the unease gnawing at me and reached for my notebook, ready to document my findings. That's when I heard it, a faint rustling, like something moving through the underbrush. Heart pounding, I turned my head, straining to see. Nothing. Just the wind whispering through the branches. I took a deep breath, attempting to ground myself. Perhaps it was just an animal, I convinced myself. But the longer I stood there, the more the forest seemed to hold its breath, as though waiting for something to reveal itself. A sudden snap of a twig behind me sent adrenaline racing through my veins. I spun around, leveling my rifle in the direction of the sound. The underbrush shifted, and I could make out the silhouette of a large animal, but it didn't look like a deer. It was too tall, too human-like. My heart raced, a primal instinct screaming for me to run, yet my feet were rooted to the ground. As I squinted into the thickening gloom, I finally caught a glimpse of it. A figure, its features obscured by the shadows, stood motionless, staring at me. A part of me wanted to call out, to ask if it was another hunter, but a deeper instinct held me back. I watched as it slowly stepped into the fading light, revealing a tanned, weathered face with deep-set eyes that seemed to drill into my soul. "Not safe here," the stranger rasped, his voice grating like gravel. "You shouldn't be out here alone." I couldn't find my voice, too shocked by his sudden appearance and the intensity of his gaze. He wore tattered camouflage, and his hands were calloused, betraying years spent living off the land. But there was something in his demeanor that set my instincts on edge. "Who are you?" I finally managed to say, my voice barely a whisper. "Just a hunter," he replied, the corner of his lip twitching upwards, an odd, almost sinister smile. "Like you. But there are things in these woods you don't want to disturb." His words hung in the air, wrapping around me like the cold mist that began to creep into the clearing. I felt a chill settle deep in my bones as he stepped closer, the atmosphere crackling with tension. "What do you mean?" I asked, my curiosity piqued even as my instinct screamed for me to back away. "Creatures," he said, his voice dropping lower, almost reverent. "They don't take kindly to those who wander too far. They watch. Always watching. You've already trespassed on sacred ground." I felt a chill run down my spine, an intensifying sense of dread. The remnants of the fire pit suddenly felt more menacing, the bones a grim reminder of what could happen to those who ignored his warning. "Just turn back," he urged, his voice more insistent now. "Forget you saw anything." The forest seemed to thrum with an unseen energy as he stepped back, his silhouette melting into the encroaching shadows. My heart raced as I realized I was alone once more, the clearing now suffocating with silence. I turned to leave, my legs moving with a desperate urgency, a primal fear urging me to escape the malevolence that lingered in the air. But as I retraced my steps, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't just leaving the clearing, I was leaving part of myself behind. The forest, with all its beauty, suddenly felt like a predator ready to consume me whole. And with each footfall, I couldn't shake the thought that I was being watched, as if the very trees conspired to keep me in their grasp. The next morning, the sun filtered through the trees with an almost mocking cheerfulness. I woke to the sound of woodpeckers tapping on the nearby oaks, their rhythmic drumming setting a tempo for my thoughts. The night before had left a bitter taste in my mouth, and as I swung my legs over the side of the bed, the remnants of those images swirled in my mind. I could still hear the echoes of the forest, the whispers that had crept into my dreams like uninvited guests. Despite the weight of my memories, I forced myself to get dressed. Today was the day I would explore deeper into the woods, to the place where the locals warned about the lost hunters. I had been curious about their stories, intrigued by the thrill of the hunt. Growing up, I had reveled in the tales my grandfather spun around the campfire, men who ventured into the depths of the forest, lured by the promise of glory, only to become part of the wilderness itself. With a heavy backpack filled with supplies, I stepped outside, the crisp air biting at my cheeks. The forest loomed before me, its shadows stretching like fingers. I followed the narrow path that twisted deeper into the trees, the soft crunch of leaves underfoot grounding me. I wanted to dismiss the town's warnings as mere folklore. After all, I was armed with knowledge and planning. The shadows deepened as I walked, trees standing like sentinels on either side. An unsettling silence enveloped me, broken only by the occasional rustle of small animals. I tried to focus on the beauty of the forest, the dappling sunlight, the rich scent of pine, the chirping of birds. But the warnings lingered like a cloud above me, heavy and oppressive. As I pressed on, I came upon an old clearing that I didn't recognize. The ground was littered with decaying leaves, and in the center stood a dilapidated wooden structure, what appeared to be an old hunting shack. The roof sagged under the weight of years and neglect. My heart raced at the thought of exploring it, the air felt charged with unspoken stories. But I hesitated, acutely aware of the weight of history that hung around it. I approached cautiously, the floor creaking under my weight as I stepped inside. The interior was dark, but as my eyes adjusted, I saw the remnants of a lifelong abandoned, dusty hunting gear, rusted tools, and faded photographs of men posing with their prizes, all smiles and bravado. I found one particular photograph that struck a chord, men standing in a line, red-faced and proud, all but one wearing the same blank expression, a man at the end of the row. His eyes seemed to bore into me with an unsettling intensity. I shook my head, trying to dispel the feeling that swept over me. It felt like I was intruding on something sacred. With a final glance at the photographs, I turned to leave when something caught my attention in the corner, an old hunting rifle, its wood polished but the barrel rusted. I reached out to touch it, my fingers grazing the surface, and a chill rippled down my spine. That was when I heard it, a low, guttural growl echoing from the shadows outside. I froze, my heart thumping loudly in my chest. The sound had a primal quality, a warning that sent me racing back to the door. I emerged into the daylight just in time to see a dark shape dart between the trees, its movements fluid and swift. I couldn't determine what it was, but the sense of being watched enveloped me. I glanced around, the forest feeling more alive, more hostile. I was now alone. The stories had hinted at creatures that hunted the hunters, and I could feel their eyes lurking, sizing me up as their next target. I hurried back onto the path, every instinct screaming at me to leave, to turn back to the safety of the town. But my curiosity was a persistent beast, one I had nurtured through years of hunting stories and ghost tales. I stopped to catch my breath, convinced it was merely a deer, maybe a bear. I needed to push on, to find a sense of resolution. Perhaps I could find more clues about the lost hunters, learn what had happened to them. As I retraced my steps, I stumbled upon a small clearing where the sunlight broke through, illuminating a patch of ground strewn with old bones. My stomach churned, nausea rising as I realized it weren't animal remains. The bones were too small, too delicate, human. Panic seized me, and I tore my gaze from the sight, stumbling backward. But a voice seemed to whisper, a sound like leaves rustling underfoot. I turned, expecting to see someone, but the clearing was empty. Only the trees stood as witnesses. I fled, heart racing, the laughter of the forest ringing in my ears. The stories had been warnings masked as entertainment, and I had been foolish to ignore them. As I broke into a run, the shadows seemed to close in on me, the sense of being pursued palpable. I didn't stop until I reached the edge of the woods, gasping as I broke free from the oppressive canopy. The town had never felt so welcoming, the familiar sights offering a fragile sense of safety. But the whispers followed me, echoing in my mind and chilling my bones. The hunters were lost, and their stories were not just tales. Something had claimed them, and now it lingered in the shadows, waiting for the next curious soul who dared to tread where they had fallen. I was no longer just an observer. I was part of the story, and I couldn't shake the feeling that the hunt was far from over. The sun dipped behind the trees, casting long shadows that flickered like dance partners across the forest floor. I had returned to the cabin that afternoon, the familiar sense of damp earth and pine needles filling my lungs, but everything felt different. The air was heavier, charged with an unnameable tension that gripped my stomach in knots. Rifling through my gear, I found the old rifle propped against the wall. It had belonged to my grandfather, a relic of a time when hunting had been more than a sport, it was a necessity. I held it in my hands, feeling the weight of history, of stories buried within the wood and metal. But something else loomed larger in my mind, my last encounter with the beast. The chilling shriek had echoed across the hills, a sound that seemed to coil around my spine. I could still hear it, a low hum in the back of my mind, waiting to resurface when I least expected it. That evening, I decided to venture deeper into the woods, the memory of the creature gnawing at my thoughts. I needed to understand. The hunter's instinct that thrummed through my veins pulled me away from the safe haven of the cabin, into the dark embrace of the forest. As I walked, I felt the trees closing in around me, their gnarled branches reaching out like skeletal fingers. The path, once familiar, became a maze of shadows and whispers. With each step, I recalled the stories my grandfather had told me by the fire. He spoke of immense beasts that prowled the forest, creatures that walked on two legs but were not human. It had been years since I dismissed those tales as old man's ramblings. Even so, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was a kernel of truth buried deep within them, waiting to be unearthed. The fading light painted the world in shades of indigo and gray. I found a clearing and set my pack down, the thud of it muffled by the thick carpet of leaves. This was where I would wait, like my grandfather had taught me, patiently. I leaned against a colossal oak, clutching the rifle tightly as I scanned the surroundings, listening for whispers in the wind. An hour passed. The forest came alive at night, with the timid rustling of creatures darting in the underbrush. I felt my heart begin to race, the adrenaline coursing through me like a drug. I was a hunter, but I was also prey. The thought sent a shiver down my spine. Then, I heard it, a low growl resonating from the shadows. My breath caught in my throat as I trained my eyes on the source of the sound. The hairs on the back of my neck prickled, a primal warning surging through me. I tightened my grip on the rifle, the wood slick with sweat. The growl intensified, mingling with the rustle of leaves as something moved just beyond my line of sight. It was larger than anything I had encountered before, each low rumble vibrating through the ground, resonating in my bones. I steadied my breathing, forcing myself to remember the lessons of my youth: stay calm, be the predator. But the moment I saw it, I'd forgotten everything. Emerging from the trees was the creature, hulking and grotesque, like a twisted nightmare come to life. Its fur was matted, dark as midnight, and its eyes glowed with an unnatural hunger. It stood on two legs, towering above me, muscles rippling beneath its skin. I couldn't move. The fear paralyzed me like a statue caught in the throes of horror. Time slowed as I did what instinct demanded. I raised the rifle, aligning the sights with the creature's heart. The growl morphed into a screech, an eerie blend of animalistic fury and something almost human. I pulled the trigger, the deafening crack splitting the silence. The bullet thudded into the creature, and for a fleeting moment, I saw triumph dance in its eyes. But instead of collapsing, it staggered back and raged. The forest erupted into chaos, creatures scattering in the wake of our encounter. I barely had time to register the shock before the beast lunged at me, teeth bared. I fired again, a desperate shot that echoed through the air like the wail of a banshee. The creature's scream sliced through the night, sending a jolt of terror through my core. It fell, but only for a moment. I scrambled backward, the rifle slipping from my grasp. The forest floor was slick with detritus, my hands trembling as I clawed my way back to my feet. I could hear its heavy breaths, feel the vibration of its growl reverberating through the trees. The darkness felt suffocating, and the fear pulsated within me, urging me to run. I turned and fled, branches tearing at my clothes, roots snaring my feet. My heart thundered in my chest as I barreled through the underbrush, the howls of the creature echoing behind me, a relentless reminder of the hunter I had become. As I burst into the clearing where my pack lay forgotten, I stumbled, my hand reaching for the rifle still nestled among the leaves. I clutched it, my fingers slick with fear and sweat. I could hear it now, the sounds of its pursuit, a primal promise of vengeance. In that moment, the stories of my grandfather became real, wrapping around me like a shroud. I was drawn into a world where hunters and hunted intersected, where the lines blurred between man and beast. I had entered the realm of nightmares, and as I turned to face what came next, I felt the weight of my family's legacy and expectation to stand my ground, to confront the darkness, regardless of what awaited me beyond the trees. The morning light filtered weakly through the dense canopy, casting fractured shadows on the forest floor. I had spent the night huddled against a gnarled tree, my heart pounding in synchronization with the ominous sounds echoing through the thicket. Each rustle felt like a whisper, teasing the edges of my sanity. When dawn finally broke, it did little to banish the dread that hung in the air. After the events of the previous day, when I stumbled upon the remnants of a campsite that bore the marks of a struggle, I was acutely aware of how isolated I was. My phone had long since lost its signal, and I was left with only the sounds of the wilderness and the ominous memories of what I had seen. I could still picture the bloodstains trailing away from the fire pit and the eerie disarray of belongings scattered in the underbrush. Someone had been here, and whatever had taken them had left no trace of its own. I pushed myself up, limbs stiff and aching. I needed to move. The forest felt alive, watching me with eyes that were hidden from view. I crawled out of my makeshift shelter, scanning the surroundings for any signs of danger. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and decay, and the fluttering of unseen creatures sent prickles down my spine. I started walking, my senses heightened, every snap of a twig making me jump. As I made my way deeper into the woods, I found it increasingly difficult to shake the feeling of being hunted. I was reminded of the old hunting stories I had heard around campfires as a child, tales meant to thrill and terrify. They spoke of a creature that marked its territory with the scent of blood and the cries of its prey. I had always dismissed those stories as mere folklore, but they now replayed in my mind with a weight I could hardly bear. I came across a small stream, its water crystal clear and inviting, and I knelt to splash my face. I needed to gather my thoughts. As I looked up, I caught a glimpse of movement on the far bank. A tall figure stood motionless, shrouded in shadow. My heart raced as I squinted, but just as suddenly as it appeared, it vanished behind a thicket of brambles. The instinct to run surged through me, but I forced myself to stay put. Perhaps it was another lost hiker, I reasoned. I called out, my voice trembling, "Hello? Is someone there?" Silence answered, heavy and oppressive. I took a cautious step toward the thicket, but a low growl reverberated through the air, chilling my blood. I stumbled back, my breath quickening, and as I turned to flee, I heard a series of loud snaps, like branches breaking underfoot. The sound was too deliberate, too close. Panic surged through me, propelling me forward as I darted into the underbrush, branches clawing at my skin as I tore through them. My mind raced, weighing options, but every instinct screamed for me to escape. I ducked beneath an overhanging branch and, for what felt like an eternity, I ran aimlessly, limbs flailing, lungs burning. The forest was a maze of sound and shadow, and just when I thought I had escaped, I stumbled into a clearing. The ground was littered with bones, wildlife remains, but in the depths of my mind, I could imagine them being something more sinister. I froze, horror gripping me as I processed the implications of what lay before me. In the center of the clearing stood a crudely constructed altar made of logs, each marked with symbols that evoked a primal fear. I could not fathom who would build such a thing or why, but the chill creeping down my spine assured me that it was not merely the remnants of a forgotten hunter. My thoughts flickered back to the tales of dark rituals, of sacrifices made to appease something ancient and hungry. That's when I heard it, the soft crunch of leaves underfoot. I wasn't alone. I crouched behind a fallen tree, heart hammering in my chest. I peered out, the forest dimming as clouds rolled in, shadowing the clearing. The figure emerged, cloaked and silent, with a gaze that swept the area as if searching for something or someone. I held my breath, feeling the weight of dread settle over me. The figure moved deliberately, tracing the markings on the altar, almost reverently. I was struck by the realization that this person seemed to be invoking something, crafting a connection with the dark energy that enveloped the clearing. My mind raced with the stories I had heard, and I felt a sickening certainty grip me. I had stumbled upon something far beyond my understanding. Then, without warning, the figure turned sharply. Our eyes locked, and terror gripped me as their expression morphed into a twisted smile. I knew I had to move. It was a choice of fight or flight, and as instinct took over, I bolted back into the trees, the murmur of the forest returning to me in a chaotic rush. I ran, driven by pure survival as the shadows closed in around me. The forest was relentless, but I couldn't afford to look back. I heard the figure behind me, the sound of pursuit igniting a primal adrenaline within. It was a game of life and death, and I had no intention of becoming another story whispered around the campfire. In that moment, I realized that I was not just hunting for an escape, I was also the hunted. The woods had swallowed me whole, and now I was part of its dark narrative, trapped in a tale that had no easy resolution. Each step took me deeper into the unknown, where the line between predator and prey blurred, and all I could do was run. The sun slipped behind the horizon, casting long, twisted shadows across the forest floor. I had spent the day retracing the steps of my lost father, a man who had vanished in these woods over a decade ago. With each crack of a twig beneath my feet, I felt the weight of his absence pressing closer against my chest. He had come here for the thrill of the hunt, they'd said. He had always found solace in the isolation of the forest, but for him, the hunt had turned deadly. As night crept in, I stumbled upon the clearing where he had set up camp on the last trip he took. The skeletal remains of a fire pit lay before me, surrounded by a ring of dirt and the occasional glint of charred wood. I could almost hear the echoes of laughter that used to fill the air, and for a moment, I entertained the fantasy of finding some clue, some trace that would lead me to him. But the forest was still, the silence only broken by the rustling of leaves, as if the woods themselves held their breath. I crouched low, examining the ashes. A hint of smoke lingered, but it was not the warmth of a recent fire. It was the cold reminder that the past would not come back to life. I felt something brush against my neck, a chill that crawled down my spine. I turned, half expecting to see a deer or some other forest critter, but found nothing but shadows coiling around the trees. I shook my head, dismissing it as paranoia. I was, after all, completely alone. I pulled out my flashlight, the beam cutting through the dark like a knife. The light flickered uncertainly as I scanned the area, illuminating the tall grass and clusters of wildflowers, their petals closing in the encroaching night. As the beam settled on the far edge of the clearing, a dark shape caught my eye, a pile of something I couldn't quite make out. I hesitated, an instinct urging me to stay back. But a driving need to uncover the truth about my father propelled me forward. My heart raced as I approached. The pile grew more distinct, the flicking light revealed the glint of something metallic amid the dirt. I knelt, my hands trembling as I brushed away the debris. A hunting knife emerged, small flecks of dried blood still adorning the blade. My breath caught in my throat. This was no ordinary find, this was my father's knife. The world around me felt suddenly oppressive, and I couldn't shake the weight of eyes watching me from beyond the trees. I shoved the knife into my pocket and stood up, my instinct screaming at me to leave. But just as I turned to go, I heard a rustling behind me. I froze, the sounds diverting my attention back to the shadows. Something was moving out there, something large. "Hello?" I called, trying to sound steady, but the tremor in my voice betrayed me. The rustling stopped, and I strained to listen. My heart thundered in my ears. I stepped back, the darkness thickening around me, and in that moment, I remembered my father's stories about the hunts he had gone on. He spoke of the thrill of the chase, the sheer joy of feeling alive amongst the wild. But there were always whispers of something lurking, something that the hunters never spoke about openly, something that evoked fear in their eyes. I turned to leave, but the rustling began again, closer this time. Panic set in as I darted toward the tree line, the flashlight beam shaking wildly as I stumbled through the underbrush. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and pine, and I could feel the darkness closing in around me. Suddenly, I glanced back, and the beam of my flashlight caught a glimpse of movement. Something was there, poised just beyond the reach of the light. A creature, low to the ground, its eyes glistening with a predatory gleam. I felt an instinctive chill run through me. Everything I had ever read about the forest and its inhabitants came racing back, every warning about the shadows of the woods. I sprinted, branches slapping against my face like angry hands, fueled by an adrenaline I hadn't felt in years. I didn't look back. I could only hear the cracking of twigs and the soft padding of something following me. My breath was ragged, my chest burning as I pushed deeper into the woods, desperation coursing through my veins. As I reached a narrow path, the forest opened up slightly, and I stumbled into a small clearing. Heart still racing, I turned to face the darkness, the beam of my flashlight trembling as I pointed it toward the noise. I felt a mix of dread and hope, praying that whatever stalked me would reveal itself. But the only answer was silence, a heavy silence that pressed down on my chest. Minutes passed as I stood, every nerve ending alight with fear. I tried to will the creature to show itself, but the shadows remained impenetrable. Suddenly, a low growl rumbled through the trees, and instinct kicked in. I ran again, darting back into the woods, barely able to keep my footing. Branches tore at my clothes, but I didn't dare slow down. I dashed forward until I stumbled upon a narrow stream, its water glistening under the faint light of the moon. I dropped to my knees, splashing water on my face, hoping to cloak my scent. My thoughts were muddied. I could almost hear my father's voice whispering warnings, but the urgency of the moment drowned them out. In the distance, I heard the growl again, closer this time. I crouched, listening as it moved through the underbrush, and I realized with sickening dread that it was circling me. My heart raced, and I felt the weight of fate pressing down. My father had come here to hunt, but I was the prey. As the growl grew nearer, the shadows danced, and the darkness felt alive. The hunt had begun, and I was trapped in the very stories that once thrilled me. I squeezed my eyes shut, praying for dawn to break, but deep down, I knew that whatever was out there would not let me go so easily. Story 4, Last Stop Before Dusk. The hum of the engine droned like an incessant whisper as I drove down the empty highway. It was late early morning, really. The clock on the dashboard glowed a sickly green, 2:47 a.m. outside. The trees stood as silent sentinels, their skeletal branches clawing at the dark sky. I had taken this route hundreds of times, but tonight, the weight of the darkness pressed down in a way that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. I had left the city behind hours ago, the bright lights fading into the rearview mirror, swallowed by the night. My mind replayed the day's events like a broken record, the argument with Sarah lingering like a stubborn shadow. Our words had been sharp, cutting deeper than I'd intended. I had decided to take the long way home, hoping that the solitude would ease the tightening knot in my chest. As I drove, the monotony of the road lulled me into a trance. With each passing mile, the landscape bled away into formless darkness. It was the kind of stillness that dropped like a thick fog, making even the noise of the tires on the asphalt seem intrusive. The radio, too, had succumbed to the quiet, only crackling with the occasional burst of static, an unsettling reminder of how isolated I was. I leaned forward, eyes scanning the road ahead, but the headlights only illuminated a small patch of the endless black. That's when I saw it, a figure standing at the edge of the road. My heart skipped, and I instinctively pressed down on the brake. The tires screeched, a harsh cry against the night, and I jerked the wheel, bringing the car to a shuddering halt. The figure was still there, shadowy and indistinct, as though it had materialized out of the darkness. I squinted, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Was it a hitchhiker? A lost traveler? The thought of keeping my window rolled up sent a chill through me. I had never picked up a stranger before, but something compelled me to roll it down just a crack. "Hey!" I called, the sound of my own voice echoing back at me ominously. "Do you need help?" For a moment, there was silence, the world around us held in a breath. Then, the figure stepped forward, a woman, hair long and wild, her clothes tattered. Her face was obscured by the dim light, but I could see her eyes glimmering with a strange light, reflecting the headlights like a feral animal. "Please. I need to get home," she said, her voice trembling, as if each word was a struggle. "I lost my way." I hesitated. The night wrapped around us, thickening with the weight of her words. Another wave of doubt washed over me. What if she was dangerous? What kind of person stood out here at this hour, looking so disheveled? But then, my conscience nudged me, what if she was genuinely in trouble? I couldn't leave her here. "Get in," I finally said, the words slipping out before I could second-guess myself. She approached slowly, the faint light revealing the dirt smudges on her arms and the look of desperation etched into her features. As she climbed into the passenger seat, I forced a smile, trying to ease the unspoken tension. "Where are you headed?" I asked, keeping my tone light. Just a few miles down." "Near the old Sinclair place," she replied, her gaze fixed on the road ahead. I should have never left. I thought I knew my way. The name sent a shiver down my spine. The 𝐬𝐮𝐬𝐫𝐞 place was infamous around these parts, a decaying mansion lost in the woods, rumored to be haunted. I glanced at her sideways, trying to gauge her state of mind. Was she a local? Did she know the stories? Did something happen? I probed gently. Why were you out here alone? She turned to me, her eyes wide and glistening, a mix of fear and something darker. I was looking for my brother. He disappeared last year. I thought he might have come back. The weight of her words settled heavily in the air. I felt a pang of sympathy mixed with an unwelcome sense of dread. I didn't know anyone went missing around here. Her laugh was hollow, a sound that had no warmth. People forget. It's easy to overlook things when they don't want to see. A silence fell between us, thick and suffocating, broken only by the sound of the engine and the distant rustle of trees. I shifted uneasily in my seat, the car suddenly feeling too small, too intimate. An unsettling thought crept into my mind. What if she was right? What if I had missed something terrible in my own life, something hiding in the shadows? Suddenly, the headlights flickered, casting odd shapes against the trees, the darkness seeming to pulse with a life of its own. I focused on the road, trying to shake off the unease settling in my bones. Just a little further, she said, her voice quieter now, an edge of anxiety threading her words. You'll want to turn off the main road soon. I nodded, though I didn't remember any turn-offs. The road stretched endlessly before us, and the only sounds were the tires humming against the asphalt and the drumming of my heart. I felt her gaze on me, intense, almost predatory, as if she was studying me. I stole a glance at her. What's your name? Lila, she said, her eyes piercing into mine. And you? David. A flicker of something passed across her face, fear, maybe. Or recognition. I didn't have time to decipher it before she turned her attention back to the road, her fingers twitching nervously in her lap. Then, without warning, the headlights caught the outline of the 𝐬𝐮𝐬𝐫𝐞 mansion, a sprawling silhouette choked by weeds and darkness. It loomed like a cursed thing, its windows like hollow eyes watching us approach. The air felt charged, alive with an unseen energy that made the hair on my arms stand on end. Stop here, Lila instructed, her voice urgent. I pulled over, the gravel crunching beneath the tires. The mansion loomed larger now, a dark cave filled with secrets. I glanced sideways at Lila, who had turned pale, her eyes fixed on the house. Are you sure you want to go in? I asked. She didn't answer, her breath quickening, and I could see something wild flickering behind her gaze. The silence hung heavy between us, thick with anticipation and dread. An instinctual part of me screamed to drive away, to flee from the darkness that loomed ahead. But another part, the curious part, urged me to stay. After all, I had already invited the darkness in. I had thought the worst of the night was behind me. The storm had receded into a thin drizzle, and the road ahead, illuminated by my headlights, felt deceptively safe. But as I drove deeper into the woods, shadows stretched across the pavement, twisting into grotesque shapes that seemed to pulse with a life of their own. Trees loomed, their gnarled limbs reaching down like bony fingers, clawing at the night. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves, a smell that clung to the inside of my car and seeped into my very bones. Every rhythmic thump of my tires against the uneven asphalt echoed in the silence, a reminder that I was utterly alone out here. I had been on this road before, but familiarity brought no comfort. The fading white lines blurred under the rain, and every so often, I glanced in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see someone or something trailing behind me. The radio flickered as I flipped through stations, static creeping in and out like an unwelcome ghost. I settled on a local station, the voice of the DJ crackling through the speakers, weaving tales of the town's history. A story caught my attention, a tragic accident that had taken place on this very road decades ago. A family had lost control of their vehicle during a storm, careening off the embankment into the dark abyss below. No bodies were ever recovered, and legends whispered of their restless spirits wandering the woods, searching for their lost lives. I shook my head, dismissing the thoughts as irrational. I was a logical person. I trusted in reason over superstition. Yet, as I drove on, an unease began to gnaw at me. The woods pressed in on either side, thickening into an impenetrable wall of darkness. The rain had turned into a steady downpour, and I strained to see through the windshield, flicking on the wipers as they struggled against the onslaught. Suddenly, a flicker of movement caught my eye, a flash of light darting between the trees. I slammed on the brakes, heart racing. My headlights swept over the area, cutting through the rain-drenched gloom. Nothing was there. Just the trees, swaying in the wind, their branches whispering secrets I could not discern. I exhaled slowly, feeling foolish for my jumpiness. It was just a deer. A figment of my imagination, or a trick of the light. I shifted the gear back to drive and pressed on, telling myself the eerie feeling in my gut was merely the result of too many horror stories and not enough sleep. Minutes passed, and the landscape began to change. The trees grew sparser, revealing a crumbling shack on the side of the road, half hidden by overgrown weeds and shadow. It looked as if it had been abandoned for years, the walls sagging under the weight of time and neglect. I pulled over, the gravel crunching beneath my tires. Curiosity pulled at me. I wanted to know what secrets lay hidden inside. The rain had lessened into a fine mist, wrapping the shack in a shroud of mystery. I stepped out of the car, my boots sloshing through the puddles as I approached the dilapidated structure. The door hung ajar, creaking softly as I nudged it with a hesitant push. Inside, the air was stale, carrying the scent of mildew and decay. I flicked on my phone's flashlight, illuminating the small interior. Dust motes danced in the beam, and I saw remnants of what once was a broken chair, a rusty stove, and a tattered curtain billowing gently in the breeze. My pulse quickened. There was an undeniable weight in the air, as if something had been waiting here, watching. And then I heard it, a faint whisper, like a child's giggle, echoing from the back room. I froze, heart thudding in my chest. I hadn't expected anyone to be here. Maybe it was just the wind. Or perhaps my mind was playing tricks on me, a manifestation of the stories I heard earlier. I called out, voice trembling, "Hello? Is anyone there?" Silence. The air felt electric, charged with a tension I couldn't shake. I stepped further inside, drawn by a compulsion I couldn't explain. The whisper returned, a soft sound that seemed to beckon me. It grew louder, more insistent, and I felt a chill creep down my spine. Against my better judgment, I moved toward the back room, where the whispers seemed to originate. The floor creaked beneath my weight, and each step felt like an invitation to something ancient and hungry. I reached the doorway, and my light flickered, casting erratic shadows that danced across the peeling wallpaper. As I crossed the threshold, I was met with a sight that made my stomach twist. A small child stood in the corner, her back to me. She wore a white dress that draped over her thin frame, hair falling in tangled curls around her shoulders. "Hey," I called softly, my voice barely above a whisper. "Are you lost?" She turned slowly, and my breath hitched in my throat. Her eyes were wide, dark pools that seemed to absorb the light. A smile played on her lips, but it was wrong, so wrong. It felt predatory. My instinct screamed at me to run, but I stood frozen, trapped in her gaze. Then her voice pierced the silence, cold and sweet. "You shouldn't have come here." The words seeped into my mind, and in that moment, realization struck me like a thunderclap. This was no ordinary child. She was a relic of the road, a whispered warning of the horrors that lay ahead. I stumbled backward, heart racing, the need to escape surging through me. Without thinking, I turned and ran, my feet pounding against the floor as the whispers transformed into screams echoing in my mind. I burst through the door, the night air hitting me like a slap. I didn't look back, didn't stop until I was back in my car, slamming the door shut like a barrier against the darkness. I fumbled the keys, hands shaking, and finally managed to turn the ignition. The engine roared to life, and I peeled away, tires screeching against the wet pavement. As I drove, I glanced in the rearview mirror one last time, but the shack had vanished into the shadows, leaving behind nothing but the eerie feeling of being watched. The road ahead stretched on, but my heart knew that the night was far from over. I had awakened something, and it wasn't done with me yet. The rain came down in sheets, blurring the world outside my windshield into a watercolor painting of dark trees and shimmering asphalt. I had only just entered the narrow, winding roads of Richwood Hollow, a shortcut I had taken dozens of times before. The road curled through the forest like a serpent, with thick canopies casting eerie shadows that shifted and danced in the headlights. This time, however, a sense of dread pulled in my stomach, heavier than the storm clouds above. As I navigated the turns, the wipers worked furiously, scratching against the windshield as if trying to peel away the layers of darkness. I was on my way home from a late shift at the diner, the greasy smell of fries still lingering in my clothes, but I couldn't shake the feeling that tonight would be different. The hollow felt alive. Each gust of wind seemed to whisper secrets, and the trees loomed like sentinels, watching, waiting. I had always enjoyed these drives. There was a certain peace in the isolation, a sanctuary from the chaos of my life. But tonight, that peace felt corrupted, tainted by shadows that shifted just out of my line of sight. As the minutes dragged on, I found myself leaning closer to the steering wheel, squinting through the downpour, praying for the familiar glow of the streetlights at the edge of town. Then I saw it, just a flicker at first, a flash of pale light darting between the trees. My heart raced, and I instinctively slowed, my breath hitching in my throat. I told myself it was nothing, just a deer skittering through the underbrush, but the moment I blinked, the light vanished. I shook my head, trying to dispel the growing unease. It was just the rain playing tricks on my tired mind. I pressed on, but the oppressive silence of the woods felt heavier. An occasional click of my turn signal echoed inside the car, underscoring the stillness. Then, just as I rounded a particularly sharp bend, I spotted another flicker, this time brighter and more insistent. My heart skipped, pounding against my ribs. It was close, too close for comfort. I pulled over, the tires splashing in a shallow puddle, and rolled down my window a crack, straining to listen. The rain's relentless patter filled the air, drowning out all sound. I half expected to hear someone call out, but the night remained silent, save for the rhythm of the storm. I knew I should just turn back, return to the safety of the main roads, but curiosity drove me forward. I had to see what was there. With a shaky breath, I eased the car back onto the road and pressed on, my fingers gripping the wheel tight enough to turn my knuckles white. Minutes passed, and the flickers continued to appear, always just beyond my reach. Sometimes it felt like they danced away from me, other times they seemed to beckon, urging me deeper into the woods. I could feel a mounting tension in my chest, a gnawing feeling that I was not alone, that something or someone was out there. Then, without warning, my headlights caught something in the road ahead. My breath hitched, and I slammed on the brakes, the tires screeching against the slick pavement. I squinted into the darkness, and there it was, a figure standing still, half hidden in the shadows, soaked to the bone but unmoving. A woman. Her clothes were torn and tattered, clinging to her body as if they had absorbed the rain itself. Her hair hung in wet strands, obscuring her face, but I could see her eyes, wide and vacant, staring directly at me. I felt my pulse quicken, a mix of fear and pity. What was she doing out here in the storm? "Are you okay?" I called out, my voice trembling against the thunder. She didn't respond, didn't even flinch. It was as though she were a statue, rooted in place, and I felt an overwhelming urge to help her, yet I was also terrified of what she might do. The rain drummed harder, and I shifted in my seat, feeling the warmth of my breath cloud the windshield. "Do you need assistance?" I tried again, softer this time. Still nothing. It was as if she were waiting for me to make the first move. The tension mounted in the silence, and I glanced around, half expecting someone else to emerge from the trees, some unseen threat lurking just beyond my vision. A chill ran down my spine, and before I could second-guess myself, I put the car in gear and rolled forward cautiously. As I neared her, my headlights fell more clearly on her face, and my blood ran cold. Her eyes weren't vacant, they held an intensity that sent tremors through my body. I saw now that her skin was pale and mottled, as if she had been lost for days in the woods. Fear tightened around my throat, yet I was drawn to her, as if she were a moth and I the flame. Suddenly, she raised a hand, pointing into the dark woods behind her. I instinctively turned to look, my heart hammering in my chest. The shadows seemed to shift, coalescing into shapes that slithered at the edge of my vision. There was something there, something I couldn't quite see in the flickering light, but I felt it, a presence that sent chills coursing through me. I turned back to the woman, but she was gone. In the blink of an eye, she had vanished, leaving only the pulsing darkness in her wake. Panic surged through me. I had to get out of there. I tore my gaze from the woods and pressed the gas pedal down hard. The tires spun briefly before finding traction, and I lurched forward, desperate to escape. As I sped away, I stole a glance in the rearview mirror. The road behind me was empty, but the sense of being watched lingered like a cold sweat on my skin. A growl of thunder rumbled overhead, and the rain continued to pelt down, relentless and unyielding. My heart raced, and I pushed the accelerator even harder, leaving Ridgewood Hollow behind me, but somehow knowing that whatever I had encountered would linger, haunting the edges of my mind and creeping into my dreams. The road stretched before me like a black ribbon unfurling into the unknown. Each mile marker passed seemed to mock my growing sense of unease. I had been driving for hours, the monotonous drone of the tires on asphalt filling the cabin with a rhythmic hum. Outside, the world turned dark, the only illumination coming from the waning moon and my car's headlights, which cut through the oppressive night like a fragile beacon. I was headed home, but a creeping dread twisted in my gut, forcing me to question whether I should have taken the longer route. The radio crackled and faded into static as I turned it off, refusing to let any more distractions push their way into my thoughts. There was something about the quiet that gnawed at me, the silence punctuated only by the soft thrum of the engine and the occasional rustle of wind against the car. I glanced in the rearview mirror. Just behind me, something flickered in the distance. Was that a pair of headlights? I squinted, but when I peered again, the darkness swallowed whatever it was. I shook my head, trying to shake off the paranoia that had begun to settle over me like a heavy cloak. As I drove on, shadows seemed to loom larger in the corners of my vision. I attributed it to fatigue and the fact that anxiety, like a well-placed prankster, often played tricks on the mind. Still, I couldn't shake the sensation that I was now alone on this empty stretch of highway. The night felt thick with anticipation, as if the very air was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. A glance at my watch told me it was well past midnight. If I pushed myself, I could be home in another hour if I could just hold on a little longer. The trees lining the highway stood like sentinels, their boughs swaying slightly as if whispering secrets. I turned up the defroster, my breath fogging the windshield for a moment. Just as I wiped the glass clear, an unexpected sound pulled my attention, a soft thump, barely audible over the engine's roar. I looked around, but nothing seemed out of place. The darkness remained indifferent to my unease, and I forced myself to breathe in deeply, letting the stale air fill my lungs. A few minutes later, in the quiet, I heard it again. This time, the sound was accompanied by a distant murmuring, a cacophony of faint voices that seemed to drift in on the wind. My heart raced. I was sure I had locked the doors, but I couldn't help but check again. The locks clicked in place, and I felt slightly reassured. Yet, the feeling didn't last long. The voices grew louder, clearer, and I strained to catch the words, but they slipped through my fingers like grains of sand. Suddenly, a figure appeared on the edge of the road, illuminated briefly by my headlights. I slammed the brakes, the tires screeching as I came to a jarring stop. My heart thundered in my chest. It was a woman, her hair wild and unkempt, her clothes torn and dirty. She stood there, staring at me, her face obscured by shadows. I rolled down the window just enough to ask if she needed help, but the words caught in my throat. The moment I spoke, her head snapped toward me, her eyes wide and frantic. "Please, don't stop," she cried, her voice a broken whimper. "You have to keep going. They're coming." I hesitated, torn between compassion and primal fear. I could see her trembling, the way her fingers clawed at her own arms as if trying to ward off an invisible force. "Who's coming?" I asked, my voice trembling more than I intended. She didn't answer. Instead, she pointed back down the road, her hand shaking. I could see her lips move as she muttered incoherently. Time felt suspended in that moment, my instinct screaming at me to drive away, but there was something pitifully desperate in her gaze that rooted me in place. "I can't help you if you don't tell me what's going on," I said, swallowing hard. "They're coming for me. You have to go." Her breath was ragged, eyes darting past me as if expecting something to emerge from the shadows. I glanced over my shoulder, feeling the oppressive weight of the darkness pressing in. Whatever she was afraid of, it felt all too real. Before I could process what to do, a sound echoed from somewhere in the distance, a low, guttural growl that sent shivers crawling up my spine. The woman's gaze locked onto something behind me, and her eyes widened to the point of nearly bulging. "Drive," she screamed. That was all the motivation I needed. I slammed my foot on the gas and shot forward into the night, leaving her standing there, a fleeting silhouette in my rearview mirror. The growling faded into the distance, but the haunting pall of her fear clung to me. As I sped along the road, I fought the urge to look back, a primal instinct to escape overpowering the part of me that felt I had abandoned someone in need. My pulse raced, and sweat slicked my palms against the steering wheel. I was still shaking when I finally reached a gas station, the flickering fluorescent lights feeling like a safe haven against the darkness. I parked, trying to catch my breath, and stepped out into the cool air. The night felt different now, more menacing, as if it had conspired against me the whole time. I headed inside, but the moment I crossed the threshold, I felt it, a strange tension in the air, heavy and thick. The attendant was nowhere to be seen, the shelf stocked with dusty products that seemed untouched for ages. But I wasn't alone. In the far corner, clutching a coffee cup with trembling hands, was the woman. She sat hunched over, her eyes darting nervously as if she could sense something closing in. She looked up when I entered, and recognition flooded her features. "They're coming," she whispered, her voice shaking. As I turned to the door, I felt a shiver run through me. The night was far from over. The fog rolled in thicker than it had the night before, wrapping the world in a damp, cloying embrace. My headlights barely penetrated beyond a few feet, the white beams swallowed by the ghostly mist. It was a bank of gray cotton, a wall that held secrets just out of reach. I had considered turning back after the last incident with the figure in the road, but the mechanical hum of the engine and the rhythmic thrum of the tires on asphalt had a soothing, lulling quality. I pushed on. The road ahead twisted and turned, winding through the dense pines like a serpent. I remembered how the night had felt alive before, the wind rustling the leaves, the occasional bark of a distant animal. Tonight, however, it was as if the forest held its breath, tense and waiting, the only sound my own increasingly frantic heartbeat. I switched on the radio, hoping for some semblance of normalcy, but all I got was static, a low hiss that filled the car with an oppressive energy. I tapped the dial, and for a fleeting moment, a voice crackled through, pleading for help. But as quickly as it appeared, it vanished, replaced once again by the unyielding buzz of nothingness. I felt my stomach drop. The dread that had been lurking beneath the surface now threatened to claw its way out. I reminded myself to breathe, to focus on the road. But the more I drove, the more the shadows seemed to shift. I could have sworn I saw figures darting between the trees, fleeting glimpses that sent my heart racing. Each time I turned my head, there was nothing, only the tall trunk swaying slightly, as if mocking my fears. As I approached a bend in the road, the sudden realization hit me, cold as ice, something was wrong. There had been no other cars on this stretch of highway since I left town, and it was unnaturally quiet. I thought about the news reports I had heard in the last few months, missing persons, strange sightings, local legends that crawl from the depths of history into the present. I shook my head as if I could dislodge the creeping paranoia. Then, just as I rounded the curve, something flickered in the corner of my eye. I turned sharply, and my breath caught in my throat. There, standing just beyond the tree line, was a figure. Not a silhouette, but a full form dressed in what looked like a white gown that flowed like mist in the night. I hit the brakes hard, tires screeching against asphalt as I skidded to a stop. My hand shook on the steering wheel as I squinted into the fog. It didn't move. Just stood there, facing me, an eerie calm radiating from it. I tried to convince myself it was just a trick of the light, an illusion brought on by exhaustion. But deep down, I knew there was something more, something that sent a chill running down my spine. I reached for my phone, the slight glow of the screen reassuring against the all-consuming darkness. No service. Just a cruel reminder of my isolation. I felt the urge to scream, to shout into the night as if that might shatter the spell that held me captive. Instead, I settled for a hoarse whisper, barely above the sound of my racing heart. "Hello? Can you hear me?" No answer. The figure remained, its features obscured by the fog, yet I felt a strange pull, a compulsion to get out of the car and approach. I shook my head violently, fighting the urge. My instinct screamed at me to stay inside, to lock the doors and drive away. Yet there was a weight inside me, an insatiable need to uncover what lay beyond that ethereal figure. I forced myself to look away, to focus on my surroundings. It was then, through the veil of fog, that the faintest sound reached my ears. A soft, almost melodic whispering, like voices carried on the wind. I turned back to the figure, my mind racing. It was closer now, still silent but undeniably nearer, as if it had been drawn by my hesitation. Panic surged through me, and I slammed the car into reverse, my foot stabbing the gas. The engine roared to life, tires spinning against the gravel with a sickening churn. I could feel the weight of its gaze, the moment stretching like a taut wire ready to snap. I didn't look back. I couldn't. As I sped down the road, the whispering grew louder in the back of my mind, weaving through the cacophony of my racing thoughts. Turn back, it seemed to say, echoing the warnings of those who had tried to dissuade me from this drive in the first place. But I couldn't turn back, not now. I pressed harder on the accelerator, determined to outrun whatever darkness had just threatened to engulf me. Each turn felt like a gamble, the headlights illuminating the path ahead just moments before the car's fate entangled with the road. Trees blurred into indistinct shapes, and the fog swirled around me like a living thing, eager to reclaim what I had stolen. Just when I thought I had escaped, I caught a glimpse of something in the rearview mirror. The figure stood at the roadside, watching me depart with an inscrutable expression. My pulse thundered in my ears, drowning out everything else. I tore down the road, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles went white. As the trees began to thin, I spotted the flicker of distant lights of the town, my sanctuary amid the creeping madness. With each passing second, I felt the burden of dread lift, but it was only temporary. The echoes of those whispers clung to my consciousness, a reminder that whatever I had seen, its presence lingered just beyond the edge of reason. As I crossed the town limits, I glanced back one last time. The fog remained a blanket over the woods, shrouding whatever horrors lay within. The figure was gone, but I knew the truth. I would never truly escape. Story 5: Echoes of the Forgotten Depth. The town of Pine Hollow had never been known for its charm. Nestled in the shadow of a mountain range that loomed like a great beast, the place had an air of quiet desperation. My father, a miner for most of his life, often spoke of the riches hidden beneath the ground. Yet, those riches came with a price, one that many did not return to pay. I had moved back to Pine Hollow after my father's funeral, returning to the dilapidated house I had grown up in. The creaking boards and peeling wallpaper were familiar, yet they felt foreign, tainted by memories that floated like specters in the corners of my mind. I found a job working at the local diner, serving coffee and stale pies to the same faces that had once been my teachers and friends. They whispered about me behind their hands, their eyes filled with pity or disgust. I had left and come back, a prodigal child to a place that would rather forget me. But it was not the town's judgment that weighed on my mind. It was the mine. It sat at the edge of town, a jagged maw that had swallowed many men, including my father. They said it was cursed, that something lurked in its depths, something that feasted on despair. Every day, I could see the entrance, a black hole against the gray rock, taunting me like a distant memory I could not quite grasp. That evening, I found myself standing at the mine's entrance, the air thick with an unsettling energy. I had promised myself never to return to this place, but something pulled at me, an insatiable curiosity mingled with grief. The entrance was chained, the rusted padlock still hanging where it had been abandoned years ago. The last mining company had gone under, leaving the mine a tomb for secrets long buried. I felt a chill run through me as the wind rustled the grasses, almost as if they were whispering warnings. But I couldn't turn away. I thought of my father, of the stories he had told me, how the tunnels twisted and turned into darkness, how miners spoke of voices echoing in the deep and shadows that moved without a source. They were tales meant for children, but they lingered in my mind like a half-remembered dream. I gathered my courage and reached for the lock. To my surprise, it gave way with a harsh clink, as if it had been waiting for me. I pushed the door open, the creak of the metal echoing like a groan in the stillness. The scent of damp earth rushed out to meet me, a dark promise that called me deeper into the mine. I stepped inside, the darkness swallowing me whole. The weak beam of my flashlight cut through the shadows, illuminating the rough stone walls, slick with moisture. I could hear the drip of water, a steady rhythm that matched the beating of my heart. I took a breath, the air stale and heavy, and ventured further in. The passageways twisted like the tendrils of an ancient tree, leading me deeper into the earth. Old equipment lay abandoned, covered in dust and memories. I could almost hear the laughter of men echoing against the walls, feel their camaraderie in the air, but it was quickly replaced by an oppressive silence. Each step felt heavier, as if the earth itself was weighing upon me, demanding that I turn back. I reached a fork in the path, the beam of my flashlight wavering as if it too were unsure of which direction to choose. I hesitated, and in that moment, I heard it, a faint whisper, a sound that swirled around me like smoke. I strained to listen, but it faded into the darkness, leaving me with only the echo of my own breath. Against my better judgment, I chose the right tunnel, drawn toward the sound as if it were a thread leading me deeper into the unknown. It felt like an eternity before I stumbled upon a small chamber, its walls etched with strange markings. The air was different here, charged with something I couldn't place. The whispers returned, louder now, like a chorus of lost souls singing their lament. I stepped further in, the beam of my flashlight dancing across the walls. The markings seemed to writhe under its light, and for a moment, I thought I saw faces staring back at me, tortured and twisted in eternal agony. I blinked, and they vanished, leaving only the rough stone in their wake. My heart raced, panic clawing at my throat. The whispers grew louder, almost insistent, beckoning me forward. I wanted to turn back, to flee, but my legs felt anchored to the ground. It was as if the mine itself was waking up, breathing in time with my own quickening pulse. I closed my eyes, trying to block out the sound, but it wormed its way into my mind, a cacophony of despair that promised knowledge and pain. And then, a voice broke through, clear and distinct. It called my name, a familiar sound that sent ice coursing through my veins. I recognized it instantly, my father's voice, deep and weathered. "Help me," it pleaded, a resonance of sorrow that echoed off the walls. I opened my eyes, a scream caught in my throat, but no sound came out. The walls seemed to close in around me, the darkness tightening like a noose. I could feel it now, an unseen presence lurking just beyond the reach of my light, and I was not alone in the mine anymore. The whispers rose to a fever pitch, and I turned to run, my heart pounding against my ribs. The path behind me twisted and morphed, a living labyrinth that sought to trap me. I stumbled, breathless, as the shadows clawed at my back, urging me deeper into the depths. As I ran, the darkness closed in, and I understood with a chilling clarity that whatever lived here would not let me escape easily. The mine was hungry, and I had awakened something that had remained dormant for far too long. The faint buzz of the overhead lights flickered above me as I stepped deeper into the mine, my breath echoing off the damp stone walls. The air was thick with the smell of wet earth and something else, something metallic that made my stomach churn. I had come to the abandoned Silver Creek mine out of a morbid curiosity and a desire to uncover its secrets, but now, as I descended into its depths, I felt a creeping dread settle over me. The entrance had been easy to find, almost too easy. It loomed at the end of a narrow path through the woods, shrouded in twisted branches and the whispers of a chill wind. I had heard the stories, the miners who had vanished, their screams swallowed by the darkness, and the strange lights that flickered inside the caverns, dancing like will-o'-the-wisps to lure in the unwary. I thought they were just tales spun by superstitious locals, but a part of me felt the weight of their truth as I stepped over the threshold into the darkness. The flashlight I had brought flickered as I turned it on, casting long shadows that warped and twisted over the rugged rock. I took a deep breath and pressed on, my footsteps echoing in the stillness. The sound bounced back to me, a mocking reminder of my solitude in this vast, forgotten tomb. I had entered the mine with a sense of adventure, but now I felt like a trespasser within a monster's belly. Deeper into the mine, the walls began to close in. I followed the faint traces of old mining tracks, rusted and half buried in the dirt. As I explored, I stumbled upon a chamber filled with remnants of humanity's toil, old tools scattered across the floor, a shattered lantern that had once guided weary souls, and a broken wooden cart, its wheels forever frozen in place. My heart raced at the thought of what these echoes of the past might reveal. I crouched over the tools, brushing my fingers across the cold metal, and a sudden noise made me freeze. A faint sound, barely discernible at first, broke the silence, a low, rhythmic thumping, like a heartbeat. Confusion washed over me. Was it the echo of my own pulse, or something else lurking in the dark? Pushing myself upright, I strained to listen more intently. The sound was growing louder, more insistent. I took a step back, my foot scraping against the gritty floor, and I cursed under my breath. The echoes of my movements seemed to mingle with the thumping, creating a dissonant chorus that left my nerves frayed. I turned my flashlight toward the source of the noise, sweeping the beam across the darkened recesses of the chamber. The light caught on a tunnel that branched off to my left, its entrance swallowed by shadows. Was that where the sound was coming from? I hesitated. The darkness beyond the beam of my light felt alive, shifting and breathing, urging me to turn back. But curiosity gnawed at me, a relentless claw tugging at my resolve. Drawing a shaky breath, I ventured toward the tunnel. The thumping grew louder, a maddening rhythm that throbbed in time with my heart. I stepped inside, feeling the cool air wrap around me like icy fingers. The walls were slick with moisture, and I could hear the faint sound of dripping water in the distance, a steady reminder of how alive this place still was. The tunnel twisted and turned, and I lost track of time as I moved deeper into the darkness. The sound shifted, becoming a cacophony of echoes, and I could feel my composure slipping. I wanted to turn back, to escape this suffocating atmosphere, but a primal instinct pushed me forward. At last, I entered another chamber, larger than the last, filled with the remnants of old machinery barely illuminated by my flickering light. The thumping had ceased, leaving behind an unsettling silence that buzzed in my ears. My eyes scanned the chamber, landing on a massive piece of rusted equipment that loomed in the center like a forgotten giant. As I approached, my foot caught on something, sending me stumbling forward. I braced myself against the machinery, but my hand slipped, and I felt a sharp bite against my palm. I had to suppress a gasp as I looked down to see a splintered shard of metal digging into my skin. Blood trickled from the wound, soaking into the dirt below. The metallic scent mingled with the dampness of the air, and I felt a wave of nausea. That was when I noticed it, the barely perceptible scraping sound, like claws against stone, coming from the tunnel I had just traversed. My heart pounded in my chest as I turned, the beam of my flashlight trembling in my grip. The shadows seemed to shift, slithering closer. Panic fluttered in my chest as I took a step back, my mind racing with what could be lurking just out of sight. I had to leave. I had gone too far, fueled by reckless curiosity, and now I was in danger. I turned to flee, but a flicker of movement in the corner of my eye made me freeze. The shadows coalesced, and from the darkness emerged a shape that sent a jolt of terror through my veins. There it was, a figure hunched low, its ragged edges blending into the darkness, its eyes glimmering like dying embers. I stumbled back as it advanced, the scraping sound echoing louder, drowning out the thud of my own heartbeat. The air grew colder as I turned and ran, the beam of my flashlight illuminating the path ahead, but the shadows twisted and shifted, whispering of things best left undisturbed. I could hear its breath now, ragged and desperate, chasing me through the winding tunnels as I raced toward the entrance, my lungs burning with fear. I could not look back, I could only run, driven by the primal instinct to survive. Every step was a battle, my feet skidding on the slick stone, until finally, I burst through the entrance, the cool night air hitting me like a wave of relief. But as I stumbled into the open, I felt an oppressive weight behind me, a lingering dread as if the darkness hungered for my return. I glanced back at the mouth of the mine, the shadows clawing at the edges of the light, and I knew I would never return. I turned and ran, the forest swallowing me whole, leaving the horrors of the Silver Creek mine behind, if only for now. The darkness pressed against me like a living entity, thick and suffocating. I could feel its weight on my chest, each breath I took replaced by an unyielding dread. The flashlight flickered, casting frantic shadows that twisted around the damp walls of the cave, making the jagged rocks seem alive, hungry. I had ventured deeper than I intended, the faint sound of water dripping echoing like a heartbeat in the silence. When I had entered the mine, I was bolstered by a sense of adventure, an eagerness to unravel its secrets. However, as I advanced, that eagerness evaporated like mist in the light. I had come for a thrill, perhaps some eerie stories to share with my friends back in town. Instead, I found myself gripped by an anxiety I couldn't shake. I paused to steady my breathing, my heart pounding in a rhythm that felt utterly wrong. The air was stale, laced with the scent of wet earth and something else, a metallic tang that made my stomach churn. It reminded me of the blood that soaked into the soil, the stories of miners who had never returned. I remembered the warnings from the locals. This place was cursed. I had dismissed them as folklore, but now the darkness felt like a warning. I moved cautiously, trying to make sense of the path ahead. The ground was uneven, littered with loose stones that threatened to send me tumbling into the unseen depths. In my mind, I could hear the whispers of the mine's past, the sound of pickaxes striking rock, men laughing, and then, gradually, the laughter fading into echoes of pain. I shivered, half expecting to see shadows flitting just beyond the reach of my flashlight. Then, I stumbled upon a small chamber, its ceiling barely high enough for me to stand. The walls were inscribed with strange markings, symbols I couldn't decipher, etched into the stone as if they were a warning to anyone who dared venture this far. I traced my fingers over the grooves, feeling the chill of the stone seep into my bones. My breath quickened, and I pulled my hand back as a wave of nausea rolled through me. As I stood there, a sound pierced the silence, a distant scraping, like nails on rock. My skin prickled, and I turned, aiming the beam of light toward the source. Nothing. Just the oppressive stillness. I swallowed hard and willed my feet to move, my instincts urging me to retreat. But curiosity held me in its grip, a pull that outweighed my fear. I ventured further into the labyrinth of tunnels. Each step felt heavier than the last, as if the cave was trying to ensnare me. The flashlight threatened to dim, and I gripped it tighter, willing the beam to stay steady. The air grew colder, and the silence deepened, wrapping around me like a shroud. Moments turned into hours, or perhaps mere minutes. Time had lost its meaning here. I called out, my voice echoing back to me, distorted and hollow. "Hello?" The word felt like a sacrilege in such a sacred, forsaken space. I cursed myself for coming alone, for being too reckless. My throat felt tight, and dread settled in the pit of my stomach. Every instinct screamed for me to turn back, but a deeper part of me was still fascinated, still yearning to uncover the mind's secrets. Then, I heard it again, the scraping sound, closer this time. Panic surged through me, a visceral jolt that sent my heart racing. I decided to take a step back, but as I turned, I stumbled over a rock, my breath catching as I hit the ground hard. Pain shot through my ankle, but I barely registered it. I scrambled to my feet, the beam of my flashlight wavering as I pointed it into the inky shadows. There, at the edge of the light, something shifted. A shape, indistinct and threatening, hovered just beyond the reach of the beam. My heart froze. I blinked, willing my eyes to adjust, but whatever dwelled in the darkness didn't step into the light. A low growl reverberated through the chamber, sending chills cascading down my spine. I backed away slowly, every instinct screaming at me to run. The darkness seemed to pulse, the shape shifting, elongating as if it was preparing to spring forward. The scraping grew louder, more frantic, echoing through the tunnels in a rhythm that mirrored my heartbeat. I turned and bolted, adrenaline surging through me like fire. My foot slipped on the wet stone, but I caught myself just in time, my breath coming in ragged gasps as I sprinted back through the narrow passages. I could hear it behind me, whatever it was. It followed, the sound of its movement a ghostly whisper in the cavernous abyss. The path twisted and turned, and I lost all sense of direction. Walls closed in, the oppressive weight of the cave pressing against me, suffocating. My flashlight flickered ominously, and I cursed under my breath. I had to keep moving, had to find a way out. The scraping was relentless, a reminder that I was now alone, that this mine had secrets far darker than I had ever imagined. I stumbled into another chamber, wider, but no less terrifying. My flashlight beam caught something glinting against the wall, something metallic. I hesitated, dread curling around my throat, but instinct nudged me to the object. As I drew closer, I recognized it, an old pickaxe, rusted and stained, stuck in the wall as if it had been abandoned in haste. Behind me, the scraping grew louder, more desperate. I could feel it, whatever hunted me was close, and I had to prepare. I gripped the pickaxe tightly, the weight of it reassuring in my hands. The darkness seemed to shift, the air thickening as if it were alive, and I felt the breath of something ancient, something that had been waiting for me to trespass. I turned, ready to confront the nightmare that lurked in the shadows, ready to face whatever horror the mine had concealed for so long. The oppressive silence of the mine enveloped me as I stood at the entrance, the steady dripping of water echoing off the damp walls. The light from my headlamp flickered erratically, casting shadows that seemed to dance and writhe with a life of their own. Each shadow whispered trepidation, weaving a tapestry of fear in my mind. I took a deep breath, steeling myself as I remembered the warnings I had dismissed too easily. Old Joe had said the mine had a soul, and like any soul, it harbored secrets best left undisturbed. I had laughed it off, attributing it to his affinity for ghost stories, but in the light of what had happened since my descent, I couldn't deny there was truth in his words. I thought of the old newspaper clippings I found in the library, detailing the mine's grisly past. The rumors of miners who had vanished, their screams echoing through the tunnels, came rushing back like a wave. I had dismissed them as folklore, but now, a sinking dread weighed heavily in my gut. Gathering my thoughts, I stepped beyond the threshold, my boots sinking slightly into the muddy ground. The air was thick with a damp, stale odor, the kind that clung to the back of your throat and made breathing feel laborious. I flicked the switch on my headlamp again, and the beam steadied, illuminating a narrow path ahead. I moved cautiously deeper into the belly of the mine, each footfall reverberating against the rock. As I traversed deeper, the chill intensified, and I rubbed my arms for warmth. I kept replaying the events of the previous day, the grotesque discovery of what I thought was a miner's skeleton, barely recognizable beneath layers of grime and dust. I had wanted to call for help, to bring others back and investigate further, but something held me back. A primal fear, perhaps, the knowledge that whatever haunted these depths would not take kindly to intruders. The tunnel began to widen, and I paused, entranced by the faint glimmer of something on the ground. I knelt down, brushing away dirt and debris with shaking hands. It was a small, rusted miner's helmet, its fabric strap frayed and brittle. My heart raced as I picked it up, the weight of forgotten lives pressing down on me. I imagined the miner, just a boy perhaps, working long hours under the earth, and I questioned the fate that befell him. I tossed the helmet away in disgust, but it landed with a soft thud that echoed unnervingly. It felt as if the mine had exhaled, a low groan reverberating through the walls. I glanced around, the shadows thickening, choking the already dim light. The air felt electric, charged with an unseen presence. A chill ran down my spine. The mine was alive, and it was watching. I pressed on, a sense of urgency propelling me deeper into the abyss. My headlamp illuminated a series of tunnels branching off in various directions. Each one beckoned, a siren call promising secrets and horrors. I chose the leftmost tunnel, intuition guiding me toward its sinister allure. As I ventured further, I began to hear a faint whispering, as if the walls were speaking to me. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was mournful, desperate. I steeled myself, forcing my legs to move forward against the primal urge to turn back. The whispers grew louder, echoing off the walls like a chorus of souls trapped in despair. I stumbled upon a chamber, the ceiling looming above like a giant's maw. My heart raced in time with the whispers, synchronizing my terror with the mine's eerie song. In the center of the room, I noticed a circle drawn in the dirt, a crude symbol that felt ancient and arcane. The air crackled with energy, a sensation of being watched intensified. I stepped back, my instinct screaming for me to flee. The whispers escalated, a cacophony pulling me closer to the circle. Suddenly, a flash of movement caught my eye, a figure darted into the shadows. My breath caught in my throat, and I froze. Had I truly seen it, or was my mind playing tricks? I shook my head, clenching my fists as fear gripped my heart. I had to leave, but the mind seemed to conspire against me, the shadows thickening and closing in. In that moment of panic, I turned to retrace my steps, but the tunnel I had entered was no longer familiar. The walls had shifted, twisting into a maze that taunted my sense of direction. I felt a surge of claustrophobia gripping me as I stumbled through the darkness, my headlamp flickering ominously. I could still hear the whispers, now a haunting chant that echoed through the corridors, chasing me as I ran. Each step felt heavier, the ground beneath me shifting as if alive. My heart pounded in my chest, a primal rhythm urging me to escape. I could almost feel the breath of the mine against my neck, its whispers growing louder, more insistent. Panic surged through me as I realized I was now alone. Whatever had watched me before was now pursuing me. I glanced over my shoulder, but the shadows held only darkness. I sprinted down a corridor, the oppressive weight of the mine pressing in on me from all sides. My headlamp flickered again, and for a split second, I saw a figure standing at the end of the tunnel, its face obscured, but the outline was unmistakable. It was hunched, its arms elongated, fingers clawing at the air as if beckoning me closer. The whispers crescendoed into a horrifying wail, the sound clawing at my sanity. I pushed myself harder, a desperate prayer escaping my lips as I raced blindly through the twisting paths. The mine seemed to shift around me, a labyrinth designed to trap me in its bowels. I had to find the entrance. I had to escape. My lungs burned, and my legs felt weak, but I pressed on. The wailing faded into a faint echo behind me, replaced by a heavy silence that felt suffocating. With a final burst of energy, I barreled down a narrow passage, praying it would lead me to freedom. As I emerged into the entrance chamber, blinking against the sudden brightness of my headlamp, I could have sworn I felt a cold breath against my skin, whispering promises of eternal rest. I staggered back, heart racing, as I caught my breath. The mine was alive, it demanded its offerings, and I had narrowly evaded being one of them. But the figure still lingered in my mind, and I knew I could never return the same way again. Whatever lay in the depths was waiting for me, biding its time until it would claim my soul. Panic flooded my senses as I stumbled deeper into the caverns, the darkness pressing in on me like a heavy shroud. Each footfall echoed off the rough walls, the sound distorting in the oppressive silence. I could feel the dampness in the air curling around my skin, as though the cave itself were alive, watching me, waiting for me to falter. Rubble and stone crunched beneath my boots, and I cursed myself for not bringing a flashlight. My phone lit the way in feeble bursts, the battery wavering with one flicker after another. I had always felt a compulsion to push further into the depths of these caverns, but right now, that desire felt like madness. The more I ventured into the heart of the mine, the more I could sense the eyes of the past lurking just beyond the veil of my vision. Each twist and turn in the rock seemed to mock my presence. My earlier bravado melted away, replaced by unease as I recalled the stories we had shared around campfires. Tales of miners lost to the darkness, their cries swallowed by the stone. I shook my head, trying to rid myself of their haunting whispers. The weight of those stories hung over me, and I wondered if my friends had turned back, seeking the safety of the surface. As I turned a corner, I was greeted by a vast chamber, the ceiling lost to the shadows above. Stalactites dripped water steadily, the sound a disconcerting metronome in the silence. I steadied my breath, the adrenaline still coursing through my veins. I inched forward, drawn to the darker recesses of the cavern. It was both beautiful and terrifying, a natural cathedral carved by time and darkness. I caught a glimmer out of the corner of my eye. My heart raced as I approached, my pulse quickening with the promise of discovery. Amidst the rock formations lay an old harness and helmet, caked in dust and dirt. They were remnants of a bygone era, lost to the passing years. I felt a chill creep up my spine. Someone had once worn this, ventured into the same abyss I now faced. Were they still down here, trapped in the depths, their souls eternally wandering? I reached out to touch the helmet, half expecting it to crumble to dust beneath my fingertips. Instead, it was unnaturally cool, as if preserved by some unseen force. I recoiled, my instinct screaming at me that I should leave. But curiosity gripped me fiercely. What had happened to the miner who had donned this gear? The answer came not in words but in a sudden rush of wind through the chamber, rattling the stones and stirring the dust like a wraith. I froze, my breath caught in my throat. The noise swelled, a cacophony erupting from the depths of the mine, the sound of something ancient groaning beneath the weight of the earth above. I felt a pull, an instinct to stay, to listen, but I fought against it. A distant rumble echoed, sending a tremor through the ground beneath me. I turned on my heel, abandoning the harness, my heart pounding. I retraced my steps, feeling the walls close in around me, the shadows twisting into ghastly shapes. The air thickened with an unnameable dread, and I could almost hear the whispers of those who had come before me. I gripped my phone, the dim light flickering as I navigated the twisting paths. Shadows danced along the walls, taunting me with each flicker. I half expected to see a figure emerge from the darkness, a specter of a miner lost to time, but nothing materialized. The sense of being observed persisted, a breath against the back of my neck that made me quicken my pace. Desperation clawed at my throat as I reached another fork, my mind racing. Left or right? I could hear the rumble again, closer this time, and I did not want to find out what it heralded. I chose left, hoping to find a way out, but the tunnel narrowed, the air growing colder, heavier. I could feel the walls closing in, the suffocating dark, a tangible weight pressing against my chest. Then I heard it, a soft, almost imperceptible tapping, like fingernails against stone. I froze, my heart pounding in my ears. The sound was rhythmic, persistent, as if beckoning me closer. A part of me knew I should turn back, run, but another part urged me to move forward. The allure of the unknown was intoxicating. I followed the sound, each step echoing louder in the stillness. The tapping grew louder, more frantic, a jarring contrast to the silence that had enveloped me. I approached a narrow opening, my phone barely illuminating the darkness beyond. The tapping ceased, and an unsettling stillness settled in. I swallowed hard, the dread coiling in my stomach. With a deep breath, I stepped through the opening. Inside lay a small chamber, and a terrible realization washed over me. The walls were etched with scratches, deep grooves that formed words and symbols, a language I could not comprehend. And in the center, illuminated by the weak glow of my phone, was a figure hunched over, its form indistinct. My breath stuttered as the figure turned, revealing a face covered in grime and shadow. It was a miner, or at least it had been once, now reduced to something ghastly, a hollow shell with eyes like dark voids. It raised a skeletal hand, pointing directly at me, and I felt the world tilt on its axis. Panic surged as the realization hit me. I was now alone in this darkness. I turned to flee, but the air felt thick, the darkness seeping into my very being. The desperate tapping resumed, louder now, echoing from every corner of the chamber, drowning out my thoughts. I scrambled back toward the tunnel, my heart racing as I fought against the oppressive shadows that seemed to reach for me, clutching at my clothes, my skin. The mine was alive with voices now, the echoes of the lost and the damned pressing in from all sides. I burst back into the narrow tunnel, my senses overwhelmed. Every footfall felt like a countdown, a grim clock ticking towards some inevitable end. I could not shake the feeling that the eyes of the past followed me, their whispers tantalizingly close. I stumbled into the dark, the sounds of the mine swallowing me whole, the shadows thickening as the darkness beckoned. I ran, desperate for the surface, for the light, but it felt like the cave itself conspired to keep me there, lost among the ruins of its secrets. Story 6, Reflections of the Forgotten. It all began with a simple renovation. The house was a sprawling relic left to me by my grandmother, its walls steeped in memories I had long since buried. I spent my summers there as a child, but returning as an adult stirred something deep within. The faded wallpaper and creaking floorboards whispered secrets to me, begging for restoration. The mirrors, however, were a different story. They hung in nearly every room, tarnished but stately, reflecting not just light but an unsettling sense of history. Each one felt like a portal, shadows flickering across their surfaces as if alive. I had planned to replace them, but something in me hesitated. I was drawn to their imperfections, as if they held the essence of the past. One evening, while peeling back layers of cracked paint in the hallway, I noticed a peculiar mirror tucked away in a dim corner, obscured by dust and cobwebs. Its frame was intricately carved with swirling vines and faces that seemed to leer at me. I wiped away the grime with my sleeve, revealing a dark, glassy surface beneath. As I stood there, a chill ran down my spine. The air thickened, and a whisper of something unkind brushed against my ear. I recoiled, but curiosity pulled me back. I had read stories about mirrors acting as gateways, portals to another world or worse. I laughed off such notions, dismissing them as mere superstition. Yet, I couldn't shake the feeling that this mirror was different. It seemed like a predator, waiting for the right moment to ensnare its prey. The first night I slept in the house, I dreamt of the mirror. In my dream, it stood grand and glimmering, but the reflection it cast was not my own. Instead, it showed a twisted version of myself, a dark figure that smiled an unnatural grin. I woke in a cold sweat, heart racing, but brushed it aside as a mere figment of my overactive imagination. Days went by, filled with renovations and memories. I found myself increasingly drawn to the strange mirror. It seemed to capture fragments of my days, reflecting not just my image but feelings I thought I had hidden away: regret, sorrow, and fear. I would catch fleeting glimpses of movement behind me, but when I turned, I found only a darkened hallway. The feeling of being watched gnawed at the edges of my sanity, but I told myself it was just the house settling. One evening, while sitting in the living room amid piles of paint cans and tools, I decided to confront my fear. I would stand before the mirror and demand that it reveal its secrets. I approached it, heart thundering, and gazed into its depths. For a moment, nothing happened. Just my reflection, tired and smeared with remnants of my labor. Then reality warped. The edges of the mirror shimmered, and the reflection distorted. I saw myself, no, the twisted version of myself from my dream, staring back with hollow eyes. The grin widened, stretching impossibly across its face. Panic surged within me, but I couldn't look away. "Help me," it whispered, the voice a chilling echo of my own. My heart raced, and something instinctual warned me to run, to flee from the horror before me. But my feet were rooted to the spot. "Who are you?" I managed to croak out, my own voice wavering. The figure in the mirror only smiled wider, its laughter a cacophony that reverberated in my mind. The world around me faded, leaving just me in that sinister reflection. Suddenly, I was pulled from the trance. A loud bang reverberated through the house, the front door slamming shut. I stumbled backward, breathless, my pulse pounding in my ears. I turned to the door, half expecting to see someone standing there, but the hallway remained empty. I tried to shake off the dread clinging to me like a wet blanket, but as I turned back to the mirror, my reflection was normal again, yet the air around me felt charged with menace. I could feel something watching me, something hungry lurking just beyond my perception. As the days wore on, I couldn't escape the mirror's pull. I found myself sneaking glances whenever I passed by, trying to reassure myself that it was just an illusion. But late at night, when silence draped itself over the house, I could feel the mirror calling to me. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, haunted by the laughter and the whispered pleas. One night, I returned home late, the shadows long and creeping. My mind was heavy with exhaustion. I trudged towards the bathroom, brushing past the mirror in the hallway. Yet, something compelled me to stop. I took a deep breath and stood before it, fighting against the instinct to turn away. The surface rippled, and the familiar figure appeared once more, its eyes gleaming with something unholy. "Help me," it echoed again, but this time, the voice was stronger, more insistent. "You're the only one who can." I shook my head, my heart racing. "I can't help you," I screamed, the vulnerability clawing at my insides. With that, the mirror cracked, the sound slicing through the air like thunder. I stumbled back, the fragments of my reflection spreading like dark veins across the glass. In that moment, I realized the truth. The mirror was not just a reflection of me, it was a trap. My breath quickened as I turned away, desperate to escape. I fled to my room, but the feeling of being watched followed me, the shadows creeping closer. I slammed the door shut, pressing my back against it, desperate for safety. But the whispers remained, echoing in the corners of my mind, growing ever closer. The owls had awakened, and it was hungry. The mirror's grip tightened, and I knew the horror had only just begun. I woke in the early hours, a chill creeping through the room like a thief in the night. The remnants of my dream lingered, shadows that danced just beyond my memory. I could hardly recall the details, but a sense of unease clung to me like a damp fog. I turned to the window, where tendrils of moonlight slipped through the curtains, casting ghostly shapes across the floor. I had never been afraid of the dark, but there was something different about this night. The mirror in my bedroom hung on the wall like a portal to another world. I had never paid it much mind, merely a decorative piece my mother had insisted I keep when I moved into this apartment. It was ornate, framed in tarnished silver, with patterns that twisted and curled as if alive. I had avoided looking at it for the past few days, but its presence weighed on me. As I lay there, the moonlight shifting against the walls, I felt drawn to it, the way moths are drawn to flames. My heart raced as I swung my legs over the side of the bed, bare feet meeting the cool floor. The air tasted stale, thick with an unshakable tension that sent shivers racing down my spine. I stood slowly, every creak of the floorboards echoing in the silence. The mirror beckoned. I approached, half expecting my reflection to flicker, to waver like a candle under a gust of wind. But it was still too still. I peered into the glass, the surface smooth and unyielding. My reflection stared back, tired and disheveled, with dark circles beneath my eyes that spoke of sleepless nights. The room behind me was shrouded in shadow, but in the mirror, everything appeared unnaturally vivid. The details of the room seemed amplified, as if the glass had the power to unveil a hidden reality. I blinked, and for a fleeting moment, I thought I saw something shift within its depths. But it was gone as quickly as it had come, leaving only the hollow echo of my own breathing. I took a step closer, heart pounding louder than ever, when a flicker caught my eye. In the reflection, the bed was not as I had left it. The sheets were twisted in an unnatural manner, the pillow at an odd angle. A chill settled in my gut. I turned around, scanning the room, but everything was as it should be. Just me and the mirror. Back in its depths, my reflection still seemed oddly vibrant. I could see the faintest glimmer of something dark behind my eyes, something that didn't belong to me. Panic surged through me, and I stumbled back, breaking the spell. I rubbed my eyes and shook my head as if to clear a fog that had settled over my mind. I needed to distract myself. I thought of my journal, the pages filled with musings about life and the gentle chaos of my thoughts. It was a small comfort, an anchor in the storm that festered around the mirror. I grabbed it from the desk and sank onto the bed, writing furiously, trying to expel the darkness that clung to me. Words spilled forth in a torrent, my hand racing against the page. I wrote about the mirror, my fears creeping into the ink as I detailed the strange occurrences that had transpired since its arrival. The way shadows danced in its presence, the soft thuds I sometimes heard at night, like someone tapping gently, almost playfully, from the other side. A noise, faint but persistent, drew my attention away from the pages. The sound of scratching, like nails against glass. My heart leapt into my throat. I glanced at the mirror, and there it was again, a faint ripple across the surface, as if something was trying to escape. I froze, my breath hitching. It was all in my head, I told myself. Perhaps the wind had picked up outside, or perhaps I had merely imagined it. But some primal part of me recognized that this was no figment. I approached the mirror once more, pulse racing as I leaned in close. The scratching sound morphed into a soft whisper, almost too faint to discern. My name. A voice that was mine yet not mine, echoing from beyond. I stumbled back, colliding with the desk. Panic flared, and I turned to flee, but that whisper wrapped around me like a vice. Stay. I shook my head, backing away, but the voice held me in place. The moonlight brightened, illuminating the mirror's frame. I glanced back, unable to resist. In the mirror, the room was no longer empty. Behind me, a figure loomed, shrouded in shadows, an indistinct shape that mirrored my own movements, yet it felt wrong, twisted. I gasped, stumbling back again, tripping over the edge of the bed. I crashed to the floor, the breath knocked from my lungs. Panic surged as I scrambled to my feet, searching for escape. The figure in the mirror grinned, a malicious curve that seemed to mock my fear. I had to get out. I bolted for the door, heart racing as I reached for the knob. But just as my fingers touched the cold metal, the whisper escalated into a cacophony of voices, all calling my name in a haunting chorus. My hand froze, caught in a snare of dread. The pull of the mirror was stronger than ever, a gravitational force I could scarcely comprehend. I turned to look back at the mirror one last time, and there it was. The figure had stepped closer, its eyes glinting with a hunger that sent ice coursing through my veins. I was too terrified to scream, too caught in the moment to think. I felt drawn to it, the mirror promising answers I was too afraid to seek. The voices called again, softer this time, almost tender, inviting me to step into the unknown. But in the depths of my terror, I knew one thing: I needed to break free. Gathering every ounce of strength, I turned the knob and threw myself through the door, slamming it shut behind me. I leaned against it, shaking, heart pounding in my ears as I pressed my forehead against the cold wood. Behind that door, I could feel the weight of the mirror's gaze, 1,000 reflections waiting to swallow me whole. I was safe for now, but the horrors of what lay within those glassy depths escaped me like wisps of smoke. I had to find a way to banish it, to sever the connection that had begun to entwine itself around my soul. But how? The whispers echoed in my mind, a dark promise I couldn't ignore. The battle was far from over. When I awoke, the night had draped itself over my house like a suffocating shroud. Shadows loomed in the corners of my bedroom, and the air felt thick and stale, as though I had been sealed in a tomb. Memories of the previous night flooded back: the mirror, the reflection, and the enticing whisper that had lured me into its depths. I shuddered, pushing the sheets aside and swinging my legs over the side of the bed. I glanced at the mirror across the room, its surface shimmering with an ethereal glow. It was an antique, framed with intricate carvings of twisted vines, and seemed far too beautiful for such a sinister presence. I couldn't help but notice how it appeared to pulse with life, the edges warped slightly, distorting the room behind it. I recalled the chilling feeling that washed over me when I'd drawn closer, as if it were a portal to something dark and unfathomable. The night before, I had spent hours researching the history of the mirror, piecing together tales of those who had gazed into its depths and found not just their reflections but something lurking beyond, a glimpse of madness, perhaps. I had dismissed those stories as urban legends, mere fodder for ghost stories told around campfires. Yet now, standing in my dimly lit room, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, not by something in the room but by something, or someone, on the other side of the glass. My heart raced as I approached the mirror, its surface reflecting my anxious visage. I hesitated, my fingers hovering just above the cold glass, remembering the way it had whispered my name, its voice like silk sliding over stone. I needed to know. I needed to confront whatever it was that had beckoned me. With a deep breath, I pressed my palm against the mirror. The surface rippled, and a shiver ran up my spine, like slipping my hand into icy water. For a heartbeat, I felt the world shift, as if I were no longer standing in my bedroom but in a dimly lit corridor, where shadows danced just beyond the edges of my vision. "Is anyone there?" I muttered, the words sounding feeble in the stillness. My breath fogged the glass, and I stepped back, startled by my own reflection. It stared back at me, but it seemed distinct, almost alive. My reflection grinned, a slow and deliberate movement that was not mirrored in my own expression. Panic surged within me. I stumbled away from the mirror, bumping into the dresser, rattling the various trinkets perched upon it. As I steadied myself, I caught sight of the reflection again. It was no longer mimicking me but gazing up towards the ceiling, its eyes vacant, void of recognition or emotion. "Stop it!" I shouted, my own voice sounding foreign and distant. The reflection did not respond. Instead, it turned its head, slowly, deliberately, until its gaze met mine once more. In that moment, a dreadful realization roared to life inside me. It wasn't just a reflection, it was something else, something that had learned to mimic my every move, my every thought. Desperation clawed at my throat as I backed away and collided with the wall. I needed to leave the room, to escape the madness that surrounded me. I turned on my heel, but my feet felt glued to the floor, as if the mirror's pull had anchored me to this nightmare. I closed my eyes, willing it all to be a figment of my imagination, but when I opened them again, the reflection remained unchanged, grinning wider now, a smile that stretched impossibly across its face. Suddenly, the air around me thickened, swirling with a cold, damp breath that seemed to come from the mirror itself. The whisper returned, soft but insistent. "Come closer." I pressed my back against the wall, fighting the urge to obey. "Leave me alone," I shouted, my voice cracking with fear. The whisper faded for a moment, and I felt a rush of triumph, but it quickly subsided, replaced by a chilling, mocking laughter that echoed in the silence of my room. I turned to flee, knowing I had to escape before whatever creature was lurking in that mirror decided it wanted more than just a glimpse of my soul. As I stumbled through the doorway, I glanced back one last time. The reflection still grinned, but now it gestured towards me as if inviting me back. I ran down the hall, each step echoing against the hardwood floor, my heart hammering so loudly I feared it would burst. I reached the front door, yanked it open, and stepped into the cool night air. But the moment I stepped outside, a wave of nausea hit me. The world twisted, and I found myself standing in front of the mirror again, the house behind me flickering like a dying flame. I reached out a trembling hand to touch the glass, desperate for an escape, but the reflection morphed into something grotesque. It was me, but twisted, with hollow eyes and a lipless grin that leaked darkness. "Join us," it whispered, and I felt a wave of despair wash over me. My reflection was not merely an echo of my existence, it was a part of me, a sinister fragment yearning to be whole. And as I stood there, trapped in that blasphemous dance of light and shadow, I realized the truth. Whatever was lurking in the glass was far more than just a reflection, it was a predator, and I was its prey. The door to my house slammed shut behind me, sealing my fate. The mirror's surface rippled once more, and I felt the chilling grip of its darkness wrap around my heart. I was no longer just an observer, I was part of the nightmare. I could feel its hunger, and now I understood. To escape, I would have to confront the very depths of my own fear. The days crept onward, each one blurring into the next, a monotonous cycle of unease and trepidation that settled deep within the pit of my stomach. After the unsettling encounter with the mirror, I had tried to convince myself that it was merely a trick of the light, a play of shadows in a dusty old house. But every time I caught my reflection in a window or polished surface, I felt a cold shiver crawl up my spine. Something dark lurked beneath my skin, and I could sense it watching me. I decided to seek answers. The allure of the mirror had become more than a fascination, it morphed into an obsession. I had neglected my friends and ignored phone calls, isolating myself in the confines of this house, wandering the hallways like a ghost. That evening, I finally pulled myself from the suffocating grip of solitude and ventured into the town library, where I hoped to uncover the history of the mirror. The library was quiet. The soft rustle of pages turning replaced the anxiety that buzzed in my head. I leaned over a table filled with dusty tomes and old newspapers, searching for anything substantial. My hands trembled slightly as I flipped through a book titled Reflections of the Past. It contained stories of folklore and legends that made my skin prickle, tales of mirrors being portals to other realms, gateways for demons that thrived on fear and despair. I pressed my lips together, skepticism battling with a growing sense of dread. Hours passed, and I was about to give in to the creeping fatigue when one particular account caught my eye. It mentioned a glassmaker who had been rumored to have dabbled in dark magic, creating mirrors that held the reflections of not just the present, but potential futures that were often grim. I turned the page, and there it was, a faded photograph of a mirror that looked strikingly familiar. The intricate engravings around its edges mirrored those of the one in my attic. Suddenly, the air felt heavy. Shadows danced in the corners of my vision as the weight of the stories pressed against me. I flipped to the next entry, desperate to find answers, my heart racing as I read about those who had met their demise after gazing too long into the glass. Family members had turned against one another, friends vanished without a trace, all linked to these cursed mirrors. A chill swept through me, reminding me of the moments I spent in front of my own mirror, the whispers that grazed my ears like winter winds. I rushed to the librarian, a frail woman with spectacles perched precariously on her nose. "Do you know where the glassmaker lived?" I asked, urgency bleeding into my voice. She looked at me, recognition flooding her features, but it was the concern in her eyes that sent my pulse racing. "Why do you want to know about him?" she asked, her tone laced with apprehension. "Those mirrors, they're not just glass. They have a history, a darkness." "Because I think my mirror is connected to him," I confessed, and for a moment, I saw a flicker of fear dance in her eyes. She hesitated, uncertain, before handing me a slip of paper with an address scrawled across it. "But be careful. They say his mirrors are still out there, waiting for someone to unleash what's trapped inside." After thanking her, I left the library, my mind racing. The address led to a dilapidated house on the outskirts of town, remnants of an age-long past. With every step, a sense of foreboding grew heavy in my chest, a warning that gnawed at me. But I felt drawn to that place, as if the threads of fate were weaving tighter around my soul. By the time I arrived, the sun had begun to set, casting long shadows that stretched across the ground like fingers reaching out for the light. The house loomed before me, an eerie silhouette against the twilight. As I approached, I noticed the broken windows, their jagged edges resembling teeth ready to bite. With a deep breath, I stepped inside, the air thick with dust and decay. Moonlight flooded through the gaps, illuminating fragments of forgotten furniture draped in white sheets. I moved cautiously, my heart pounding, each creak of the floorboards echoing like a countdown. I was drawn deeper into the house until I reached a small room at the back. There, in the center, stood a mirror, covered by a moth-eaten cloth. I hesitated, my hand hovering over the fabric, heart racing. The tales churned in my mind, warning me of the horrors that could awaken with a single touch. But I was too far gone, the need for answers overwhelming any sense of caution. I yanked the cloth away, and there it was, an ornate mirror that seemed to breathe, the glass shimmering faintly in the dim light. As I gazed into its depths, I was struck by a visceral sensation, as if the mirror was absorbing my very essence. I leaned closer, entranced, my reflection distorting and shifting. My heart raced as a shadow drifted behind me, slipping away just as I turned. There was something mocking in the glass, and I began to feel the weight of unseen eyes upon me, whispering secrets that stirred the air. Suddenly, I felt a pull, an invisible force dragging me closer. I stumbled back, panic clawing at my throat. The mirror's surface rippled, warping reality like a nightmare. My reflection grinned unnaturally, and I heard laughter, high, cold, and echoing. It was no longer just my reflection looking back. Something else lurked behind my eyes, something dark and insidious. The air crackled with energy, and I stumbled, trying to break free from the paralyzing grip of the mirror. I turned to flee, but the laughter followed me, twisting around me like a noose. I could feel my heart thundering in my chest, desperation driving me to escape, but the shadows within the glass were now reaching out, seeking to ensnare me. I finally managed to wrench myself away from the mirror, gasping as I stumbled out of the room and back into the hallway. But the feelings lingered, the laughter echoing in my mind, wrapping around me like smoke. I could hear whispers, promises of power and knowledge that entangled with my fear. As I fled the house, I vowed to confront whatever darkness had taken root in my reflection. But I knew deep down, it was only the beginning. The mirror had awakened something, and I could no longer ignore the fact that it was tied to my fate. I needed to understand its power before it consumed me whole. The air in my apartment felt thicker than usual, clinging to my skin like a damp blanket. I couldn't shake the sensation that the walls were closing in on me. It had been 2 days since I shattered the mirror, the one that had reflected not just my face but something darker lurking behind it. I had swept up the shards, disposed of them carefully, but I felt their jagged edges lurking in the corners of my mind. Though I tried to push the memory away, I could still hear the soft murmurs from the dark reflection, words that clung to the edges of my consciousness. The warning to look deeper, to understand. I had locked the bathroom and turned away from it, avoiding the sight of the empty space where the mirror had hung, yet I knew it was only a matter of time before I had to confront it again. Tonight, I was restless. A frigid chill crept through the cracks in my windows as I paced the living room. The small, flickering flame of my candles cast long, distorted shadows that danced along the walls, reminding me of the figures I had seen in the mirror's depths. I wondered if I had made a mistake by getting rid of it. Maybe I should have left it intact, studied it more, tried to understand whatever darkness was woven into my reflection. The clock on the wall ticked with a steady rhythm, but the sound seemed to stretch, growing louder and more oppressive. It echoed in my ears, drumming against the anxiety that clawed at my chest. I tried to distract myself by rummaging through my bookshelf, but the words in my favorite novels blurred together. I finally settled on a horror anthology, hoping to immerse myself in someone else's terror rather than confront mine. As I read, I found myself drawn to a story about a woman who was haunted by her reflection. Each time she looked into a mirror, the woman on the other side would smile sinisterly, a smile that was not her own. The tale resonated too deeply, and I slammed the book shut, my pulse quickening uncontrollably. I had not even finished the first story when I heard a soft, persistent tapping coming from the bathroom. My heart raced. I stood up slowly, every part of me screaming to ignore it, to barricade myself in my room and forget the world. But curiosity, that insatiable beast, propelled me forward. I could not allow fear to dictate my actions, not now. The door creaked open, revealing the dim light that barely illuminated the empty space. I stepped inside, the floorboards creaking softly beneath my weight. The room felt colder as I approached the wall that had once held the mirror. And then I heard it again, the tapping, a rhythmic insistence that echoed my racing heart. I turned to the wall, fingers trembling as I brushed against the cool surface. The sound intensified, as if something was trying to break through. Taking a deep breath, I whispered, "Who's there?" My voice quivered, nearly swallowed by the silence. The tapping stopped. An eerie calm washed over the room, and I felt the weight of that silence, pressing down on me, coaxing out my worst fears. Just as I considered leaving, I noticed something. In the faint light, a shape had begun to emerge on the wall, just where the mirror had been. It was hard to make out at first, but soon it became clearer, a face, indistinguishable yet familiar, its features twisted in a grotesque mimicry of my own. my breath caught in my throat. I stumbled backward, but the face didn't fade. Instead, it leaned closer, as if drawn by an invisible tether. The eyes, they were not mine. Deep and hollow, they seemed to glimmer with dark intent. Panic surged through me, propelling me toward the door, but I couldn't look away. It felt as if the face was begging me to understand, to delve deeper into the darkness I had so desperately tried to escape. "What do you want?" I cried out, my voice catching on the edge of desperation. For a moment, the face remained still, its gaze locked onto mine, and I thought I saw a flicker of understanding in its depths. Then, it twisted into a smile, a mocking, chilling grin that unnerved me to my core. The voice came, a low murmur that echoed in my mind, a chorus of my own thoughts twisted against me. "Look deeper, deeper, you cannot escape." I stumbled back, hitting the edge of the tub. The face began to change, morphing into fragmented images, the lines of a distorted memory, moments of regret, and shadows of fear that flooded my mind. I felt the images pressing down on me, dragging me back into the depths of my own past. Suddenly, I caught a glimpse of my own reflection, distorted and grotesque. My skin, pallid and thin, stretched over bones that ached with the weight of guilt and self-loathing. I was trapped in a nightmare, with no way to awaken. The face on the wall began to tremble, cracking like porcelain, pieces of it splintering and falling away, but the laughter escaped into the air, sullying the room with its dark, infectious glee. I had to escape. I turned to the door, but it was blocked, as if a force from the other side had sealed it shut. "Help me," I pleaded, the words tumbling from my lips before I was even aware of speaking. The face leaned closer, its voice dripping with malice. "You are already lost." In that moment, I understood. The mirror had never been the monster. I had been its keeper, a vessel for every fear I had ever faced. I felt the darkness wrap around my mind, pulling me toward the grotesque face. And as I fought against it, my final thought was a desperate plea to escape, to break free from the very reflection of my own lost soul.